Welcome to Resolving Reality, an independent Irish media platform. In this 8th video episode, I interview Dr. Bill Warner on the subject of political Islam. Visit Dr. Warner's website for more information on him and his work, politicalislam.com, and also check out his YouTube channel, and the links for those will be down below in the description. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, Resolving Reality, and for all our other podcasts and platforms, visit our website, resolvingreality.com. Okay, Dr. Warner, good morning to you and welcome to Resolving Reality.
Looking forward to this.
Great, thanks a lot for being here. I've had you in mind for a while now because my brief of my alternative media website is to just provide a broad education on lots of topics, and of course, Islam, or political Islam, should I say, is a rather big one that isn't discussed by the mainstream media, which is where the likes of me kind of come into the picture. So let's start with a slight foundation here. First of all, how did you get into this topic? And I know you've answered this a million times, so you can be as brief as you like, just to give an introduction, and we'll go from there.
I'm a 78-year-old man, and I got into my study of Islam when I was 30 years old, so that was some time ago. I was interested in mystical Islam, Sufism, and so I read about that, went to meetings and stuff, Sufi dances for about a year, and then drifted away. My second phase of learning came as a college professor. I had many Muslim students, and I believe if you're going to understand somebody, it helps to understand their religion, so this time I had read the Quran cover to cover, and I then read the life of Muhammad. And so I realized, woo, this is pretty intense material. So then on September 11, 2001, when I saw the second plane hit the second tower, I said, this is jihad, Islam is here. And in that moment, I knew that I wanted to devote my life to making the doctrine of Islam clear and easy to understand, which is sort of what I've been doing for the last few years.
Mm-hmm. And of course, when you say Islam to people, they immediately think religion, and they put it in the same category as the Judeo-Christian, Christianity, Judaism, and they're all kind of the same but different. But you call it political Islam. You approach it from that angle. Why do you call it political Islam?
Well, for a simple reason. I came to my study of Islam late in life in the sense of doing a serious formal study. For instance, I've studied Torah at the Orthodox synagogue. I've read Buddhist doctrine. I've read quite well up on Buddhist doctrine, actually. Then I've also read Hinduism. So when I started reading on the subject of Islam, I realized, there's something very peculiar here. How much of it is devoted to me, the outsider, whom the Quran calls the kafir? And so I thought, well, this is very strange, because when you read Buddhist sutras, you read about how to be a Buddhist. You don't read how bad non-Buddhists are. And everything about the non-Muslim, the kafir, was bad. So I said, we need to set this part aside, because I, as a non-Muslim, I am not part of Islam. So therefore, but there is a part of Islam that impacts me. So I call political Islam the part of Islam that impacts me. The religion of Islam is what you do to go to heaven and avoid hell. And I have no interest in that at all.
Okay, interesting. It could be a surprise to a lot of people that it isn't as black and white as just being a religion, and it's as simple as that. And let's look at I suppose the core of it is the books of Islam and the life of Muhammad, of course. So can you give us an overview of the Islamic literature involved here, and then the Quran itself?
Okay. Well, let's start with what most people think, that Islam is a religion based on the Quran. But there's something very strange about the Quran. There are 5 pillars in Quran, and there's not instruction anywhere in the Quran on how to do those 5 pillars. Well, if the essence of being a Muslim is the 5 pillars, where do we find this information? Very simple. There are over 100 mentions in the Quran which says that Muhammad is the perfect human being, and that if you want to lead a good spiritual life, you must imitate Muhammad in every word and deed. And it turns out we have a huge amount that's known about Muhammad. We have the Sirah, his life, which is it's not just a biography. Remember, he is the perfect human being, so what you read about in his life is what you're supposed to do. So we have here then the door of the Quran opens up, and behind it we have the Hadith, which are Muhammad's traditions, things he said and did. And then we have the Sirah, his life, biography, which, by the way, is an incredible read. It's a great novel. Even if it weren't, Muslims presume it's true, but when I say it's a great novel, let's not use that word. It is a great story.
I see. Okay, interesting. And most people will just, they've heard of the Quran so much, but not about the others. So that's not really common knowledge. And would you say, sorry, I'm looking at my questions here. If we, what's kind of outstanding about it if we compare Islam to Christianity and Judaism? What's the outstanding thing about it when you compare it to the other two main Judeo-Christian religions?
One simple fact, the golden rule. It turns out that all religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, and Judaism, have some form of what I call the golden rule. Some version of be a good neighbor, do unto others you would have them do unto you. So seeing the person we're interacting with as an equal to us. In Islam, there is no golden rule. There are two sets of ethics. There's one set of ethics for the Muslim. Every Muslim is a brother and a sister. And then you have the ethics devoted to the kafir, which is a very different ethic. For instance, jihad can be practiced against the kafir. So with Islam, we have ethical dualism, and that is its critical difference. Because in Christianity, Buddhism, and all these others, we have we have a unitary ethic. All people are to be treated equal. So that's what I say the biggest difference is an ethical difference.
I see. And well, you mentioned the concept of jihad there, and it's not a modern thing. Of course, anyone who knows their history, they know that, you know, since the Crusades, maybe, or maybe before that, even, I'm not sure. There's a long history of jihad here. It's not something that just popped up with ISIS. So, what is this concept, and where did it originate?
Well, jihad, of course, does not mean holy war. Set that aside. The word for war in Arabic is harb, H-A-R-B. So what we have here is we have the fact that we have jihad means effort. So there are different forms of jihad. There's jihad of the pen, writing, jihad of speech, jihad of the sword, and jihad of money. So there are different forms of jihad. And we need to understand these. And like I say, we need to understand it does not necessarily mean war at all. There is a form of jihad, jihad of the sword, that's like war, but the others are just, could be, say, a talk about Islam at a school could be considered jihad because it is pressing against the kafir, the non-Muslim.
Interesting. So anything that kind of forwards the Islam itself is kind of part of the concept of jihad.
Correct.
Okay. And when we look at history then, again, which many people neglect, and that's where we should get our best lessons is from history, what examples have we got of situations where Islam has kind of altered an area from being Christian or a different religion into being fully Islamic?
Let's start with Muhammad. Muhammad committed 95 acts of jihad in the last 9 years of his life. Now let's talk about why that's important. Muhammad had two separate careers. His early career was a preacher, and he preached the doctrine of Islam for 13 years and gained 150 followers. That's about 10 a year. He then went to Medina, where he became a politician and a jihadist, and when he died, every Arab on the peninsula was a Muslim. So the jihad business was what brought success, and we need to understand that. Now let's step back from Muhammad and look at history. I seem to have been the first person who ever asked this question. How many people have died in jihad over 1,400 years? And here are the numbers I get. Now, these are rough numbers. We have 60 million Christians, 80 million Hindus, 10 million Buddhists, and 120 million Africans. That's 270 million who have been killed over the process of jihad over 1,400 years. This is a massive number. Now, here's the question. Why is it that I'm the first person who's asked this question? That's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, and of course we're going to get into the political correctness and stuff like that nowadays. So many topics are becoming taboo that you can't even discuss anything, even if it's historical fact, and it's something that actually happened not just once but many times. And when we look at, say, of course, you know, me being based in Europe, there is the massive cultural changes, the multiculturalism and things like that. So what is the Islamic doctrine of migration, or the law of saturation, as you've called it?
Right. Hijra is the name for Islamic migration. Here's how important it is. In the West, we keep up with the centuries and the years based on the life of Christ. We don't use that term anymore, but it's before the Common Era and then Common Era. That is, it's based on the birth of Christ. Now, you would think that in Islam, if they were going to create their own calendar, they would use something like, the night of the first revelation of the Quran. That seems like a good place to start. Or maybe the birth of Muhammad. But no, the Islamic calendar starts with the migration from Mecca to Medina. Why? I just told you earlier, because that's what brought them overwhelming success. So the Hijra is so important that the Islamic calendar is based on it. And the purpose of Hijra is to, let me restart there. The purpose of Hijra is to bring Islam to the country you're moving to. So the Hijra is a subtle form of jihad.
The concept of that's mentioned many times to those who've analyzed Islam is the concept of the tipping point, or the kind of maybe this certain level at which the kind of spread of migration affects things. Where did this idea come from?
Well, it comes from an observation. Let's step back and look at the country we now call Turkey, which used to be called Asia Minor. And it was part of the Byzantine Empire. It used to be a Christian nation. Islam invaded, and then over a period of centuries, it became completely Islamic. Today, I think I read a figure that 99.7% of all Turks are Muslim, which leaves the remainder for Christian. And how did this happen? Over a very long, slow period of time. What happens is once the Muslims move in, they start asserting their dominance over things that are social. For instance, there's pressure, I don't know this for a fact, but I bet you there's pressure in Ireland for the schools to start serving halal meals.
Or getting there, yeah.
Okay. So the point is Islam pushes forward on all fronts. Let me describe this. This is a civilizational war. Muhammad was the greatest genius about war who ever lived. Who kills anybody today for Caesar? Alexander the Great, Napoleon, nobody. But someone died today because of Muhammad. And Muhammad's genius about war is to declare war on say, what we would call fashion and clothing, food, education. There's no aspect of being a human being that is not covered in Islam, because Islam is a complete way of life. And so it covers everything, and it has their way of doing things. And once the Hijra process starts and more Muslims start coming in, they demand more and more political rule for themselves. For instance, in America, we see that they self-form ghettos, and in those ghettos, they begin to elect Muslim political leaders. And once that starts happening, the Kafir will never be elected in that range again.
It's interesting, and it makes sense to me, but it's also hilarious when you compare it to some of the multicultural ideas and the political left saying that everything's going to be lovely and fine, it will work out, integration is a good thing, and it's really, really possible. Well, what do you say to that argument to people who think that Islam can integrate into an area on a large scale and not dominate?
Show me the history. Let's go back to Turkey. At first, Islam was small, but once it reaches a certain point, after that point, the process will become completely one of Islamification that is not in history. The only way to stop this Islamification process is with war. We saw this in the Balkans, and we saw this in Spain. It took 700 years for the Spaniards to drive the Muslims out. So if you don't use force, once Islam starts and reaches this tipping point, which is about 10%, you will discover that it is unstoppable without force.
Wow. It's certainly a lot more of a critical situation than those in the politically correct camp would like to admit, of course, again, because they don't really focus on the historical side of things. And
Here, can I explain why?
Yep.
They do not need to focus on history, because for the left, this idea which they're putting out today has never been really manifested except in their mind. A utopian has no need for history, because his idea is to be judged on its beauty. Because these leftists of today are the first people who've truly understood leftist politics. And so therefore there's no history that they need to reference. The beauty of the idea is enough.
I see.
History doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. That's the difference between ideology and reality. Mm-hmm. And history is part of the past reality. And, with, of course, one of the central issues here is the concept of Sharia law. Now, some have heard of this, but where did this originate, and how does it operate exactly?
Well, if Islam is a separate society and a complete civilization, it needs its own set of laws. Doesn't this make sense? And as a matter of fact, the Quran insists that this is true, and so does Muhammad. Once Islam moves in, everything needs to be judged on the basis of Quran and Sirah and Hadith, or another way of putting it is Quran and Sunnah, S-U-N-N-A. Sunnah is simply what Muhammad said and did, is the perfect example. So that's what we need to be looking at, is the divine life of Muhammad, and he will show us how to guide in all things, and one of those things is the Sharia. Now, when you ask Muslims about Sharia, they say, oh, it's just how we practice our religion. And there is truth to that. If you take a text such as The Reliance of the Traveler, you'll discover that indeed part of the Sharia is about religion, about a quarter of it. What's the other three-quarter about? Well, how wills are to be written, how justice is to be served, and there's a whole codification of justice. And one of the most interesting things about the Sharia is that under the Sharia, the place for the non-Muslim is as a dhimmi. A dhimmi is one who does not have any political rights and can practice their religion in the home, but not in public. So the dhimmi is a second-rate, second-class citizen, and that's who we are in the Sharia. So the Sharia that we need to be concerned about is not the Sharia of how many times we pray a day, and that is included. There's a great detail about prayer in the Sharia, but that is not important to you and me. Let me do a sidebar, by the way, here about the subtleness of politics and religion. We see that in the United States, the same thing is beginning to happen as happened in Europe, which is the Muslims will commandeer the street for prayer. Have you ever noticed that in Europe? Now you would say, well, this is religious. The prayer is religious. Commandeering the street is a political action. Do you follow me? I'll bet you if I come to your hometown and you and I go out to get another half a dozen friends there with us and we go out and we start blocking the roads, I bet we'll meet some policemen in Ireland who don't have a sense of humor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
But if you're a Muslim and want to blockade the street, well, we have to be tolerant. Why do we have to tolerate people blocking the streets? I don't care if they pray or not. That's not any interest of mine at all. But why do they commandeer public places to do it? Simple. It is a political action and an assertion of power.
Interesting. And recently there was a situation in Ireland because there was an Irish woman who was a former member of the Irish Defence Forces. She was actually in the Air Corps, I believe, and she ended up in Syria, I think, or somewhere in the Middle East, and became radicalized. So there's been some media attention recently. The Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, said there's no problem with bringing her back into the country. So there's been a slight debate. You have the Islamic community here trying to distance themselves from ISIS and the terrorist kind of element, and then there was indeed a protest in the streets. And you're right, there is because of the politically correct narrative here, it's kind of the state has to just constantly accommodate those from the outside with very different political ideologies.
And this is only beginning. There will be much more of this, trust me. There is no end to Sharia until it's 100%. And that is, as we go through the future of Ireland, unless something is done about Islam, in a few centuries, there will be no trace of anything that was Christian in Ireland, or its history will disappear as well. And it will be replaced by an Islamic history. Let me give you an example of that. If you're a Pakistani and want to study history, it starts with the invasion of Islam. Pakistani history starts with that. There was no history before that, is the official point of view. Because the history before that is Jahiliyyah. It is without Allah, and it is offensive to Islam. And so therefore, why would we want to bring this up again? We need to destroy all the history of the Ireland. Just as an example.
Well, it's interesting as well that the things seem to be changing in waves. So in Ireland, the idea of Irishness and Irish culture, and of course the Catholic Church, has been kind of pushed aside and marginalised, attacked by the state, attacked by the media, and that lays the foundations to make it easier for a new ideology to come in.
Exactly. Let me ask you this. Have they started telling the Irish peoples that if you love Ireland and its history, that's a form of white supremacy?
Yeah, things are getting like that, yeah.
Figures. That's what they tell us here.
Yeah.
I'm a Southerner, and if I love the southern part of America, then I'm a white racist, a white nationalist, and that is the way it's said. But if a Muslim loves their history, oh, that's wonderful diversity. But my history, it doesn't belong in any part of diversity. So notice that the left and the Muslims agree on the subject of Irish history. It needs to go away.
I see. Okay, so there is some sort of an unholy alliance there, there somewhat. You need to destroy the competition before you move in and replace it. And
exactly.
As well, with Sharia law, of course, like, as you pointed out, some people will say, Muslims will say it's more of a religious thing, but it's clearly a socio-political thing as well.
Exactly.
Like you said, it's more about that than anything else. And of course, with a lot of Western countries, we already have our own common law systems that comes from, the Greeks or the Roman times, where we got it from the British, and that's where they got it from. And, Sharia, I mean, are these compatible at all? Is there any scenario where Sharia can operate and common law at the same time?
All right, let's look at this. Your common law and our law here in America is made by whom? Human beings. Sharia law comes from God. Now then, which is the better law? The human law or the God's law? Well, it's really obvious, isn't it? God's law should be supreme. Why should human law have any existence at all? Because the complete system of government is laid out in the Sharia, so there is no need for any modern politics. We simply need to follow the Sharia. So in the United States, we have something called the Constitution. And in Article 6 of the Constitution, it says the Constitution, this document, is the highest law of the land. But Sharia says, oh, not so fast. Sharia is the highest law of the universe because it is God's law. So therefore, we have this, do you see any compatibility here? For instance, let me ask you this. How would you change or reform Sharia? Well, how do you do that? The Quran is perfect, unalterable. The life of Muhammad is already over and done. It's fixed. So how do you do anything about it? How do you reform Sharia? You can't, because the Sharia is based on the Quran, the Sirah, and the Hadith, or the Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad. So this is very clear. By the way, could we go back to a word you used, which we passed over, which was called radical? Someone was radicalized?
Yeah, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
What do we mean by that word? What do we mean by the term radicalized?
Yeah, exactly. This is what the media says. They say that it means a form of something that's quite extreme, I suppose.
Now, what is extreme? Let's go back to something here. What defines normal in Islam? The Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad. Those define Islam, and therefore they define its normalcy, if you will. That is, they describe its boundaries, what all it includes. And what does that include? Remember, Muhammad was involved in 95 acts of jihad in the last 9 years of his life. This includes torture deaths, enslavement, crucifixions, torture, traitors, spies, counter-spies. So this is the nature of Islamic political doctrine. So if you're practicing Islamic political doctrine as laid out in the Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad, how can that be radical? That is normal. Do you follow me here? Now let me explain to you why this is not so clear to people. Because there are two Islams. There are two Qurans. Remember I told you that Muhammad's career, a preacher for 13 years and converting 150? The Quran during that period of time is pure religion, and there is no jihad and there's no death. But remember how that wasn't successful. So when he moved to Medina, where he became a jihadist, he had overwhelming success. And so therefore, the jihad is normal for success. It is not extreme, it is not radical. If Muhammad did it, it defines normalcy. It's very simple. But when we use extreme, we think about, oh, well, if you rape women because of whatever, that's extreme. No, the Quran says that can be done. It says over in several verses that you can have sex with those whom your right arm possesses. And who is that? Women who are your captives. So therefore, rape of kafir women is not extreme. It is laid out in the Quran, and Muhammad and his companions did it as well. So we have to decide, if we want to use the term radical, we need to say, which measuring tool are you using? And I use the Quran, the Sirah, and the Hadith, and nothing that Islamic State did, not one thing, was extreme or radical. It all was patterned on Muhammad's life. It's very clear.
Interesting. Yeah, because I know you've mentioned this in your speeches and in your interviews that people, well, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but you're talking about how, they don't follow our ethical way of looking at things.
Correct.
So the term extreme comes from our perception of what's moral, isn't it?
It's extreme to us, but it is not extreme to the doctrine.
Okay. And speaking of the, it's often talked about the different culture in Islamic countries and how women have a different status in society. Is it really kind of I was going to say extreme? Is it really as bad for women as people say it is? And is that a cultural thing that's a recent thing, or again, does it come from the religious texts?
It all comes from the religious text. I sell a small book called The Islamic Doctrine of Women, and it lays it all out very clearly. Women are always second-class citizens. They're basically, as a child, she's under the reign of her father and her brothers. When she's married, she's under the ruling of her husband. A Muslim woman always has a man who is over her. And so, for instance, there's a Quran verse in Surah 4, which is the chapter of women, in which it is said that if women do not obey, you can beat them. So therefore, if a Muslim man is to beat his wife, is that against the law? Well, in America it is, but in Sharia it is not. So therefore, we see that we have to look at women through the eyes of Sharia. And it's simply, I have 2 daughters, and it would break my heart to see them raised in an Islamic society, because they're free-spirited people who are intelligent, they're capable of movement on their own, and they don't need a man to rubber stamp what they do. But in Islam, they would have to have that. So, no, I do not care for the way that women are treated in Islam.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame that, again, we have to deal with the elephant in the room. This multicultural, politically correct experiment is in this fantasy land, and they are actually part of something that actually contradicts other things that they say they stand for. So, for example, the politically correct left. Politically left groups in places like Germany and Sweden have been instrumental in encouraging mass migration, which actually impacts on the rights of women, which is something else that they say that they stand for. And there's been several examples in Sweden and in Germany where there have been rapes because of this cultural clash, because of the migrants. And the feminist groups have been kind of silent because they're not allowed to criticize Islam.
This is a tragedy. I hear anecdotal stories. In Germany, for instance, women will no longer go out at night on their own. And this used to be they would go out on their own at night and not even think about it. And now then it's become too fearful. We see the immigration results are being suppressed in the news. That is, let me give you an example. I have a group in Europe, and we had a German Facebook page. And what we did was we simply put up 2 graphs. One was the increasing crime, and the other was the increasing migration. And we just asked the question, is there any correlation or cause and effect here? Our Facebook page was taken down. It turns out that violated their, rights of something. Anyway, it was considered bigotry or something, and so it was taken down. What we keep hearing is, and I know this to be true, is that we do not have free and open discussion in our news in America anymore. If you want to discuss what is wrong with Islam, then you're a racist, hater, bigot, Islamophobe. And by the way, the left will not. The left thinks that they can be the hammer in Islam, the anvil, and they'll tear down our culture, both in Europe and America, and create a beautiful utopia. Remember, I talked earlier about how the left has no need of history because it's utopian. If they had a need for history, they would know that in Iran, it was the left, the Tudor party, who brought Khomeini to power, not the mullahs. They worked with the mullahs to bring them in. 5 days after Khomeini came to power in Iran, he issued death warrants for all the Tudor party, the leftist leaders. So the left thinks that they can be good buddies with Islam. And they will be good buddies with Islam for as long as Islam needs them. When Islam no longer needs them, they'll go down the drain.
Yeah, there's that naivete always if people buy into it or they fall victim of it, it will get them back in the end. And it reminds me of that concept I'm sure you've heard of Islamo-communism, the idea of the two kind of being similar in some ways, that just like communism, where places where that's taken hold, those who start the revolutions in the beginning, the useful idiots, are eventually taken out by the monster that they invited in. It's a fascinating correlation between the two.
Very much so. One has to only look at both the Russian Revolution and the French Revolution. By the way, the American Revolution was unusual here. I'm going to be a nationalist, a white nationalist here. Our creating of a nation was not followed by a bloodbath. It's unique.
I see. Yeah, interesting point. And about the we brought up of course the social impact of Islam and the relationship with the attitude towards women. Why is it that we always see, especially in the politically correct mainstream media, they often show trying to peddle and promote the idea that Islam is fine and it's a great idea for Western Europe, and they often use Western women as examples. And I've no doubt some of them are actors, but some are also genuine people too, of course, many of them. Why do you think that a Western woman would buy into a culture like that if it doesn't really match the Western way of living?
You know, I don't understand it at all. They see a little that they want to see, and the rest they just block out of their vision. I do not understand how any woman who considers herself free at all. Well, actually, I've asked this question more than once. Why do some Western women marry Muslims? And I have an answer for that. Number one, they want a husband. In the United States, and I see the same is true in Europe, is that people want to have sex, they want to have affairs, but they don't want to have a family. And so as a result, if you're a woman who wants a husband who will go out and earn a job and bring home the money and wants kids, marry a Muslim man. You will get that. Islam demands basically that all Muslims marry and have children. So the other thing here is true as well. In America, we have what I call the feminization of the American male. That is, and more and more we see male who are considered not very masculine. If you're a woman who wants a masculine man, laden with testosterone, go down to the mosque, you'll find them, a whole room full of them. So there are some reasons for women to be attracted to Islam. They can get a husband, and they want what in America we call a manly man. Now somebody's going to object to all this, I'm sure, but they object to just about everything else I say.
Yeah, that's all right. You know, the other side of it kind of makes sense, and it is true that this isn't just one issue. The Islamification of the West is part of a broader picture here. There's a bigger movement going on, and the feminization of Western men is obviously part of that, because as we talked about earlier, when you remove one thing, something else steps into the vacuum. And women, like, you know, most women anyway, want some sort of masculinity. So it does make sense. But, you know, you can't control the free will of people. And Western women, if they want to go down that road, that's fine. But it might get them back later. Just because you're attracted to someone and you want to get into a situation with them doesn't mean it's good for you long term down the line.
Here's an interesting statistic. In America, it's considered that 2 out of 3 people who convert to Islam leave it within 5 years. So many don't stay.
Right, for that kind of reason. It's not what they thought it was going to be.
It's not what they thought it was going to be. They don't like it as much as they thought they would. Here's another interesting statistic. Someone did a study of those who call themselves Muslims in America. 20% of them do not believe in Allah, the Quran, or Muhammad at all. They simply don't have anything to active participation in Islam, but since they're a member of a larger community which is very centered on Islam, they don't talk about it. So it's estimated that 1 Muslim in 5 in America is not really a practicing Muslim at all and doesn't believe any of the business. I bring you these facts because people sometimes think, well, anyway, I just find them interesting statistical facts.
Well, that's probably the difference between, I suppose, religious and secular Muslims. Just like in other religious faiths, people can say that they are a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim, and that doesn't mean they're exactly like all the other ones. It depends on how you interpret the doctrine, how much knowledge you have about the religion, and how you let it impact on your life, basically. So there's different levels, isn't there? And also, I'm sure the counter arguments, the politically correct types who listen to our conversation now would say things like, oh, you know, you're stereotyping over 1 billion people here. Not all Muslims want to create jihad. And I think that's why you always say that, you know, in your speeches and in your interviews, you always say, I don't talk about Muslims, I talk about the ideology.
Exactly. And see, the beauty of that is I can hold it in my hand and it says what it says and we can both agree on it. I call the study of Muslims Muslimology. That is, it's a study of what Muslims think and say. which is a sociological concept which I have no objection to, but it should not be confused with Islam. Islam is a doctrine found in the Quran, the Surah, and the Hadith. Now, how you practice that as a Muslim, that's an entirely another question. I don't even get involved in that at all.
Interesting, because as well, I heard the point raised that if you have over like 1.2 billion, or is it 1.8 billion Muslims, I'm not sure, who even a kind of a quarter of that or 10% of that is still quite a lot. If only 10% of that number follows the Quran and the Seerah and the Hadith to the letter, that's still a high amount of people who are not radicalized, following the doctrine to the letter.
This is true. This is true. So it's Islam we need to study. We don't need to study Muslims, other than if there's a Muslim at work. I always encourage people to discuss Islam with Muslims. Most of them, they love to talk about it. So, but we need to distinguish between the doctrine and the people. I leave the people alone. Who knows what, I mean, well, there's another thing I wanted to mention here, though. You threw in the term radical or something about the effect of Islam on a society. People say, well, not all Muslims want Sharia, not all Muslims practice jihad. Let's take that one phrase, not all Muslims practice jihad. In the United States, we fought a war in the Second World War in which we fought on the Pacific Front and the European Front. This was a nation that was at war as hard as it could go. And yet only 10% of the people were actually in the military. So 90% of the people in America in the middle of an all-out war were not part of the military. So were we at war? Well, yes, we were. It turns out you don't need everybody going to war at once. All you need is a society that supports it. So we need to understand here that if not all Muslims practice something, that's still enough to cause trouble. Similar studies have been shown that in high crime neighborhoods in America, only 10% of the people in the high crime area are criminals. The other 90% are not. And yet you would not want to be caught in that neighborhood at night because it's dangerous. But Bill, only 10% of the people believe in crime. 10% is enough to ruin your life.
As well, my take on the whole the Islamification of Western Europe, which is really what's happening through sheer numbers. If there was some sort of a different system, even where Sharia law wasn't able to take hold, and I sound like I'm being interested in a utopia here, but maybe there's a way it would be possible if you took certain parts out of it. If the numbers of Muslims was much lower, and they weren't Muslims who were 100% engaged with the texts and who wanted to integrate, maybe it would work. But the more numbers you bring in, that 10% starts to come into play then. So if you bring in 1 million Muslims into Europe, and for argument's sake, 99% of them aren't determined and follow the text, you've still got that 1% who do make the impact, and that's what we should be worried about.
Exactly. And in any argument, I'm going to use the term, if you're a Muslim who believes in jihad and you're talking to another Muslim who does not, you have the weight of doctrine on your side. That is, the peaceful Muslim at work and talking to you may be all lovey-dovey, but when he's talking to another Muslim, he cannot say Muhammad was not a jihadist. Okay, he can't say that. So the Muslim who practices the full Islam has it all over the so-called moderate Muslim who does not have anything except his own will. I don't want to follow that. By the way, when Muslims say something like, I don't follow that, I say, well, will you condemn it? Because you'll find sometimes that Muslims want to say, well, I don't follow I don't have sex slaves. I don't follow that. All right, you don't, and I'm glad you don't. But will you condemn Muhammad for having sex slaves? Well, now then you're talking about a very different question. Do you follow me here? You may not practice it, but will you condemn Muhammad for practicing it? Or you may not practice it, but will you condemn the Quran for saying you can beat your wife? You say you don't beat your wife, but will you condemn the Quran for saying you can? There's a big difference between saying, well, I don't do it, and then me asking you to condemn it. Because the Muslim will not condemn the Quran and they will not condemn Muhammad. They can't do that or they're an apostate.
I see.
Do you see the difference in the question?
Yeah, and they're not equal. So the opinions of a Muslim who follows the text to the letter and one who isn't so passionate about it, they're not equal because one will dominate the other.
By the way, the Quran goes further to say their inequality is even in heaven. Every Muslim, when they die, believes they will suffer what's called the punishment of the grave and then Judgment Day, where they go to heaven or hell. The jihadist who's killed in jihad does not have punishment of the grave and is not judged on Judgment Day. He goes directly to the seventh heaven now. So the Quran itself says that the peaceful Muslim is not equal to the jihadi Muslim. The Quran, it says it itself.
Okay, and that's the one that wins, and then you've got the
exactly.
You have the imams, I think, and the mosques and all of that as part of the structure, and then you have Muslims getting involved in politics. These are the ones who are more ideologically motivated, and their opinions kind of will dominate the quiet ones, you know.
Exactly.
It's kind of like, it's like probably like, say, for example, you look at Ireland right now, I can see parallels between that dynamic and what happens here when it comes to, you know, the political dynamic of left and right politics, that the left is dominant, the media is dominant, all the activist groups, they're the dominant ones. There's not more of them. They're just noisier and they're more motivated. Can you see the correlation there?
It's funny, I'm releasing a video in the morning. It's called Why We Are Losing. And that's one of the things I talk about is that we're losing because we don't show up to protest. We don't show up to I was part of the civil rights movement in America. And one of the things we did was we had protest. We had mass civil disobedience. That is, in those days, if a black man couldn't eat at a particular restaurant, if you flood the restaurant with both whites and blacks who are demonstrating, the restaurant has to shut down. So therefore, this is called mass civil disobedience. That is, we're disobeying the law, but we have so many of us that they can't arrest us all. So therefore, we need to develop this concept of a radical free speech in which we get together as a group and we do something. If we did it as an individual, we'd be arrested. But if there's 1,000 of us that commit some act of blasphemy, the cops can't arrest 1,000 people. So what I'm saying is the video that I'm putting out is that we need to start becoming politically active ourselves, and we have to stop believing that somehow or another it's just going to all work out okay. That's not really strategic planning. It's all going to work out. No. We need to have plans, and we don't have plans. We have plans. I say we need to develop the mind of war and leave the mind of worry. Worrying is never going to solve our problems. Now, when I use the term war, I'm not talking about bombs, I'm not talking about guns, I'm talking about ideological war, the war of ideas.
Yeah, this is not the time for people to fall asleep and be too nice, because your enemy will not be nice to you. And looking at, again, to go back to the texts, how does Islamic ideology instruct Muslims to deal with people who are nice to them? The kafir, the non-Muslim, does it say to reciprocate with kindness and hospitality, or?
No, it does not. The kafir is to be used for your own purposes. Whatever it takes to do that is what he can be used. Because the Quran is very clear on the fact that the kafir is despised by Allah, hated by Allah. Allah plots against the kafir, and Allah clearly says that jihad can be practiced against the kafir. So you can be as nice as you want to be, but you will never change the doctrine. If the person, there's a term created here in America called sudden jihad syndrome. And it works like this. You have some Muslim, he lives next door as a neighbor. He's a nice guy. He waves at you, whatever, he's a very friendly person. And then lo and behold, you discover a year and a half later that he's joined ISIS. Or he's rented a car and killed some people on the sidewalk by driving over him. And you go, well, he was such a nice guy. We need to understand here that Islam is dualistic. When it's weak, it has one behavior. When it is strong, it has another behavior. So everything about Islam, although it preaches the religion of one, is actually practiced with the number 2. That is, there's a peaceful Islam in the sense of if you practice the Islam in Mecca, the early Quran, there is no jihad. But if you practice the full Islam, then it is included. So we need to understand here that Islam always has 2 faces it can present you, and nice is one of those faces. But that nothing changes. He may be as nice as he wants to be, but if he ever wants to execute an ethical option that's different, that is available to him.
There's something you brought up before in one of your lectures. I think it's the concept of tying into that, about that being that duality. It's the concept of taqiyya, I think. What does this concept mean exactly?
Well, When you study Islamic doctrine, you run across some incredible concepts. One of the concepts you run across is sacred hate. Really? Sacred hate, okay. So there's also sacred lies, sacred deception. Allah says, I am the greatest of deceivers. Let that rest on your mind a moment there. Allah says, I am the best of deceivers. I'm the best of plotters and schemers. I mean, this is their concept of the divine. So now then, if God can deceive you, why can't a Muslim deceive you? Well, he can, but only under one condition. He's not supposed to lie to you about something personally. He can only lie to you if it advances Islam. So therefore, if you have a Muslim who's trying to sell you a used car, he shouldn't lie to you about the car, but it is okay to lie to you about Islam. So it doesn't mean you're a liar all the time. It just says if it is advantageous to lie, then a Muslim may lie to press forward with Islam.
Wow. Yeah.
So this sacred hate and sacred deception, these are concepts that I don't know about in other religions.
The one of the often the from the politically correct camps, or even just from people in general who aren't seeing the bigger picture and who aren't seeing the possible consequences of Islam here, is that they talk about the dynamic of what's happening in the Middle East, and it's often brought up about Israel and the interference of NATO in those areas. Have you dealt with that kind of argument before, where people say it's the actions of NATO that's creating Islamic terrorism and not the beliefs?
What I notice is the people who want to advance that argument don't want to talk about the doctrine of Islam. So what I say to such a person, let's say we're at a party and I meet you and you're advancing this theory that it's American foreign policy that's the problem. I go, okay, let's examine what do you think is happening here? Okay, good. You think that's what's happening? How can we judge this based on what Muhammad did and said and what Allah says in the Quran? Therefore, I'm more than willing to sit down and discuss with you what you think it's political science and foreign policy, but I want you to listen to my discussion as well. So while I'm perfectly willing to listen to your arguments about its history and foreign policy, but will you listen to my arguments? But what I find is those who want to hold the position that it's foreign policy or political science do not want me to discuss my point of view. That is, it's okay for them to say what it is, but it's not okay for me to say I don't think so. Once again, we get into this censorship, which is, I'm a radical free speacher, so I object to all forms of censorship, including hate speech laws.
I see. Okay, so that's interesting. That without the component of understanding Islam itself and where it comes from, someone who has that mindset, and they're looking at what's happening, and the political correct media is telling them that, oh, well, the reason why there's terrorism in Western Europe and there's these, the bomb attacks, the gun attacks, the people driving trucks down shopping streets in Sweden and in other countries, and I think one happened in Canada as well. The politically correct contingent and the left will say, it's the actions of NATO that's doing it, it's splinter groups. But what you're saying is that's actually people who are just following the text to the letter.
By the way, these people may be able to explain things in this century, but how do they explain the previous 1,300 years?
Right.
Huh? That is, Islam is doing the same thing today it did 1,400 years ago. So nothing changes over 1,400 years, but now then all of a sudden you want to discuss about American foreign policy or NATO. I say we need to discuss all 1,400 years, including NATO. But remember, Islam has killed 270 million non-believers over 1,400 years, and most of those years were before modern Europe.
Right, okay.
They can't explain that. They can't explain the history. And once again, I find the left doesn't know any history. They don't need history because their ideas are so beautiful they've never been expressed this way before.
Yeah, that's the key component, is that none of this is particularly new. And as well, it doesn't change the fact that regardless, even if you remove the terrorist component and ISIS and all of that, it doesn't change what we were talking about, which is that culturally it's not compatible with Western Europe, and I don't think anything's really going to kind of change that, because my brief and what I'm mostly concerned about, of course, is the impact of Islam on Western Europe, including places like Ireland. And we have the incident I mentioned earlier involving the Prime Minister and the woman who became radicalized and ended up in Syria. But then there's also a big mosque was created in Dublin a while back, and the numbers keep increasing here. So that's the point of these interviews, is to raise awareness about which direction this is all heading in. I think it's really important.
I think it's critical for the very existence of our civilization. When I say our civilization, what I base this on is an ethical cornerstone of the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And the other is the intellectual basis of critical thought, fact-based reasoning. Islam does not use fact-based reasoning. It uses instead the rule that all reasoning must correlate with the Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad. That is, you can think or say anything you want as long as it does not contradict the Quran or Muhammad. Well, that's authoritarian reasoning. It is not critical thought and fact-based reasoning. But what we're seeing here is that the American and European left is beginning to insist that no reasoning is allowed if it contradicts what we say as well. So the left is beginning to mimic now Islam in their own sense.
Well, there's so many aspects to this, and it's been great talking to you. It's been very educational as well. I knew some of the basics here, but that's why I love talking to specialists, people who've spent the time to go into detail about things, because it's a great source of knowledge that we need right now. It's certainly not being spoken about in the mainstream media, and unfortunately, because of that, many people they're walking into a trap, and then political correctness does the rest, really. But in conclusion here anyway, Doctor, thanks very much for your time, and it's been a real pleasure.
I always enjoy talking about my favorite subject.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's been great anyway, and I will enjoy working on this one, editing and putting the word out there, and just increasing people's knowledge about this very important subject of political Islam.
Well, thank you for having the courage to even lead this discussion.
You're welcome. Dr. Bill Warner of Political Islam, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for watching Resolving Reality. That was my conversation with Dr. Bill Warner of the website politicalislam.com. Also, check out Dr. Warner's YouTube channel, and the links for those will be down below in the description. Support Resolving Reality on YouTube, share those videos and subscribe, and have a listen to the Resolving Reality radio episodes as well. For all our podcasts and platforms, visit our website, resolvingreality.com. So once again, thanks for watching. Until next time, and enjoy Resolving Reality. Right, so welcome folks, anybody watching back. Thanks for checking this video out. So for anyone who didn't know, I did a presentation at the University of Dallas on Thursday, 21st of November, about my work, Marxism and Marxist indoctrination. It was went on for it's the pinned tweet in my profile. It's also one of the recent upload videos on my YouTube as well. So it went on for about 45 minutes plus Q&A afterwards, which went through a lot of the basic principles of this very serious global problem. You really have to watch the first one to really appreciate this presentation. This is pretty much the other slides that I didn't use the first time around, and some other concepts thrown in as well. So I just spent a bit of time today just editing that, making it look reasonably presentable
so I could show you all the other things that I left out of that presentation. I mean, it's such a huge subject, but also such a huge subject, but so important and potentially multifaceted and potentially confusing as well. So I try to present this information in easy to read or easy to absorb style in these presentations for people who won't get around to reading the book, or who are too lazy to read books, or just not into books. So these presentations will go some of the way to fix that, hopefully, to get more people in. And I'm hoping that you'll all share this video around. So I'm just kind of deliberately taking my time here in case more people are willing to join or whatever. Right, so I will go straight into it. I'm going to switch my views. Where am I going here? Right, and I'll go presentation. Just looking at my output here from current slides. So this is the most important thing. If you really want to help what's going on in the world, put some energy into learning this, would you? Do everybody a favor, do yourself a favor, and study into this. You won't look at the world the same way again after learning about this subject. I can guarantee you that much. I was this turned things around for me in a big way. And we're ready to rock and roll. Right, so here's part 2 of my presentation on Marxism, and you can see my book there, Red Pandemic, The Global Marxist Cult. It's on sale in 5 different languages, English, Spanish, French, Italian, and German. I'm trying to get it done in Portuguese as well, so I've got some Brazilian friends who'd be interested in that version too. And you can see in the cover of the book a lot of the things we've been dealing with over the years. You know, starting on the top left, COVID and the legalization of drugs, the United Nations, European Union, you know, communism. The left, Black Lives Matter, feminism. You can see the plate with the leaf on it, veganism, the planetary health diet. You can see the boat people, or mass, that represents mass immigration. Below that, you've got a pregnant female. So the lower birth rates and abortion are connected with this issue. Over on the left-hand side, you can see the trans symbol mixed with the Soviet symbol in a trans ideology. You can see no families, the breakdown of the family unit, and the education system, indoctrination, universities are all connected in with Marxism. A bit lower down, you can see the upside down cross, which is kind of Satanism, satanic symbol, or, you know, the destruction of Christianity. To the left of that is Mr. Karl Marx himself. Then you have the wind turbines represent the climate change movement. And you have to the right of that Vladimir Lenin. So we will move on from here then. So just a few quotes to get started. Now, I did originally had this presentation prepared for an American audience, but this is a global problem, and things apply. This stuff applies to all of us, particularly in Western countries, not just in America. But you can see these quotes here were kind of tailored for an American audience. So this is from the American Labor Union leader, George Meany. I quote, "The conflict between communism and freedom is the problem of our time. It overshadows all other problems. This conflict mirrors our age, its toils, its tensions, its troubles, and its tasks. On the outcome of this conflict depends the future of all mankind." Pretty dramatic, if you ask me. Next slide. This is from the FBI chief J. Edgar Hoover. This was in the Elks magazine, August 1956. I quote, "The menace of communism in this country," meaning the United States, "will remain a menace until the American people make themselves aware of the techniques of communism. The individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. The American mind simply has not come to a realization of the evil which has been introduced into our midst. It rejects even the assumption that human creatures could espouse a philosophy which must ultimately destroy all that is good and decent." And that guy was dealing with communism for a few decades in the States, so he knew exactly what he was talking about. Next slide. When we get ready to, by the way, if anyone's listening, just let me know if the audio is good. So a few people usually pop into YouTube. So if anyone joins, just let me know if the audio's come through okay. So I'm not talking to myself here. There's some sort of dropout. Right, so here's a quote from Alexander Trachtenberg. He's the leading member of the Communist Party USA, and he said this at the National Convention, Madison Square Gardens, 1944. Quote, "When we get ready to take the United States, we will not take it under the label of communism or the label of socialism. These labels are unpleasant to the American people. We will take the United States under the labels which we have made very lovable. We will take it under liberalism, under progressivism, under democracy." It is particularly for my American friends. The Americans are still erroneously calling this liberalism. And as I always argue, how are you supposed to fix the problem if you're not even calling it by the correct name? So this is not liberalism, this is Marxism. I explained that in more detail in the book and in the previous presentation. This is not liberalism. So here is to add on to what happened in the last presentation, the various different initiatives or things that are affecting the world. The big issue that issues that everybody's been talking about over the years: mass immigration, trans ideology, radical sex ed, hate crime, hate speech bills, all this crack are all different kind of initiatives being pushed by Marxism. Many of them are based on class struggle. And here's one of them, probably the big issue in Western countries at the moment, which is mass immigration. So here's some notes on that agenda and what it means, how it works. So in this equation, the migrants, so again, in case someone's watching this presentation first, which you shouldn't, Marxism is all about dividing people into groups and putting one in the oppressor class, one in the oppressed class. So one is kind of dominating or controlling the other one, or using the other one. So when it comes to mass immigration, migrants are the oppressed, and Western countries are the evil, white, capitalistic oppressors. Right, and this links into the pathological altruism I talked about in the last presentation, the idea of trying to save other people or other countries or other ethnic groups at your own expense, essentially. Being nice, like taking more people onto the boat even though your boat is sinking, that kind of mentality, you know. So this sub-agenda is supported by cult members in governments, mainstream media, education, NGO, non-profit complex, the United Nations, European Union, etc. So it's not just at a local level or a state level, it's at a global level. All of these groups are ideologically on the same page, whether it's an activist in the street supporting this or someone at the top of the United Nations. They're all pretty much all one on this, pushing this agenda. So mass immigration is a type of economic attack on Western countries. It's a kind of overload. It has several different impacts, including overloading the welfare state. It puts pressure on services as well, and housing, obviously. So it can be construed as a kind of an economic attack on the West. It causes collapse and breakdown. And Marxism has always been very interested in attacking its old foes: capitalism, Christianity, culture, and the traditional family unit. So mass immigration is a way to destroy countries. It's a very easy, straightforward way of destroying countries, pretty much. This, particularly on an economic level, but it's also a form of attack in other ways as well. So it's a form of physical and social attack on the ordinarily resident populations of whichever country is affected. So in Ireland, I mean the Irish; in Sweden, I mean the Swedish. This agenda is some agenda is a form of physical, social attack, right? Including crime, sexual crime, the clash of cultures, breakdown of law and order, and so on. It also this sub-agenda also accelerates the demographic changes. Eugenics is a big part of Marxism on a bigger picture level. The idea of producing certain types of individuals in society. A lot of this comes from the idea of the socialist man, the idea of creating new generations of people who will help the ideology proliferate. And it's a big subject, but that's why, as I mentioned there. So, mass immigration combines with other sub-agendas or other Marxist initiatives on this issue, including feminism, abortion, trans ideology, veganism, etc. They're all connected in with the birth rates in one way or another. I'll just go to the next slide. Just checking if anyone's made any comments on that. Right. So if anyone's on X or YouTube and you're signed in there, just give us a comment, make sure everything's going okay, if you wouldn't mind. But really, I'm going to it's going to be obviously recorded, and I'm going to just pimp it out as usual. So here's the next one. Sub-agenda of feminism, right? So you can see the sign there, smash the patriarchy. So this sub-agenda is based on a lie. It's based on a lie that women, the oppressed in this equation, have suffered more historically than men who are the oppressor via this thing called patriarchy, which is a lie. Well, a lot of Marxism is based on a lie. It's a distortion of the facts. It's a very binary, oversimplified way of viewing things. This is, of course, an attack on the... so the sub-agenda of feminism, again, is an attack on the traditional heterosexual nuclear family unit. Again, accelerates the demographic changes, eugenics, by, it's brought in contraception and normalised that. It's also brought in abortion, normalised that as well. And you can see the abortion figures for Ireland the last few years, particularly since 2018, have been incrementally increasing. Feminism is also generally encouraged motherhood much later in life, if at all. A lot of it's become more and more normal now to females not to have kids. Talking about healthy females who can have kids, it's becoming much more normal for them not to have children, whereas in the past it was perfectly normal for females to have kids, often in their late teens, early 20s. Some females still do, but the amount of them has dropped, and that's because of feminism. So feminism, from that point of view, is literally death for a people, and that's just feminism. Also, another interesting part of feminism is that it inflates the egos of the infected or affected females. It encourages, we'll expand more on that later on, it also encourages degeneracy or trashy behaviour through hedonism, so pleasure-related degeneracy. I don't know if anyone saw it. There was a video going around earlier on X of this female who had sex with 100 males in one day, and she was having a bit of an emotional breakdown. What a shocker. So this kind of degeneracy, you remember, all comes from empowerment, right? It's empowering for a female to do what she wants and use her body how she wants. Also, another effect of this is that the ego is placed on a pedestal. So this is the idea that, the ego becomes, we'll expand on why that's the case later, but in the brainwashing, the ego is put on a pedestal and the person is, made to feel that they're a wonderful human being, often while having very little to any value at all. So I usually have a bunch of arseholes on the street next to me here. I won't bother talking over them, revving their engines and stuff. So this sub-agenda also empowers indoctrinated females into positions of authority and influence. And this is a thing that's been happening a lot the last few decades, and it has made a difference because there's no offense to females. Females are a little bit more prone to emotional indoctrination, and the ideology of Marxism, in a sense, it's in Marxism's interests to put more and more women into positions of authority. It's not only men that are pushing Marxism, of course. I'm just saying this is one of the effects of feminism. This is only a small part of what we're talking about. And feminism also has an important role in demoralizing the warrior class, which is the males. It's created this notion that men and women's opinions should be equal even in times of war, which is now, which is not true. Men are more suited physically and psychologically to fight. That's been a feature of the human experience going back millennia. But in the recent decades, men have become more feminized because of Marxism. There has been a certain amount of feminization of men and a masculinization of females. So both of them are being pushed into roles that are not psychologically or physically suited to, thanks to the effects of Marxism. This has a demoralizing effect on the males and imbalances the females too. The end product is that nations are weaker for it and are unable to defend themselves, which is a major problem. The planet is oppressed in the climate change movement, right? So the poor planet is being oppressed by the oppressor. In this case, it's the polluting humans are the oppressor, the evil oppressors, right? So this particularly applies to opulent Western countries, right? So Western countries tend to be more prosperous. They have more technology. They have more cars, more economic output. So in particular, Western countries, you've noticed, are the enemy here. They're oppressing the poor planet, right? So the planet is being abused because of us capitalistic evil trash bags who have more than one car and so on, more than one vehicle. So it's basically a Marxist conspiracy theory that the world is going to end unless we reduce CO2 emissions and stop using fossil fuels. That's basically what the Marxist this climate change agenda is. It's all based on a lie, right? It's an attack on Western countries because there are billions spent on inefficient renewables, right? So this obviously doesn't apply to the new communist alliance countries. So new communist alliance like Russia, China, North Korea and their allies are not playing this climate game. They're not spending billions on these renewables. Only Western countries are. Now, where am I going with this? Well, it's a part of a kind of economic warfare on Western countries that a lot of people can't see because they don't understand the history of Marxism. If you're going to fight a war, you need a strong economy. So in my opinion, just to go straight to the core of this so I don't dance around the issue for you, I believe that this new communist alliance is preparing for a military invasion of the West. They've been planning this for decades and they are helping the West become psychologically and economically weaker before they make their move. And they're starting to make their move, but I don't knock myself off track here. So again, going green only applies to Western countries. This sub-agenda contains the DNA of the Cold War. Now, this is a big subject. I'll go more into the background later, but we're just focusing on the surface points for now. So the climate change movement contains DNA of the Cold War. So the communist countries wanted to hamper nuclear power development research in Western countries, including nuclear weapons. So that should be for obvious reasons why. We all know about the Cold War. We know there was different nuclear powers involved. So that was part of their agenda. A lot of this comes from the Cold War programming that they wanted to make the West weak in terms of nuclear weapons. So, damaging. It was actually, there's three big Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island and the Fukushima Daiichi incident. I believe one of the 3 Mile Island, some researchers say that was sabotage, and I wouldn't be surprised at all. And also the Daiichi Fukushima incident, which we all heard about, was a tsunami apparently caused that. I think there might have been some Chinese involvement there, or I can't really prove it, but it would make sense. I'll go into more detail why in the book. But anyway, just to put it on the table, nuclear power is really the solution to our energy needs. It's clean. The new reactors can run off the spent fuel from the old reactors. So you can recycle the fuel, you see, and it's clean. Doesn't produce any pollution. Nuclear power plants can go 24/7, 365 days a year, whether it's sunny, dark, day, night, wherever it is in the world, and it's perfectly safe if it's done right. In France, over 80% of the power grid is nuclear. Germany dismantled their grid after the Fukushima incident. The German the Greens, the lefties in Germany said, oh no, that could happen to us. We can't risk that happening. Let's dismantle our nuclear power plants with the help of Merkel, who is a commie, of course. And they start to spend all the money on renewables and start to destroy their economy. I mean, how often do tidal waves hit Germany? Never, right? So, again, it's all just Marxist bullshit. Remember, Marxism either deliberately or accidentally likes to blow money. It likes to steal or likes to waste money any way it can, right? You want to keep these nut jobs away from everything in society, particularly economics. They are like kryptonite to economic prosperity. So, of course, the climate change movement is also a way of stealing via the carbon tax. And this also punishes industrial output. So again, attack on capitalism. What you're doing is you're trying to force that equity. You're punishing people for being successful, making money, generating profits. A lot of this comes from the twisted brain of Karl Marx and so on, and those before him, like Babeuf and stuff. But Marx made it more economic. They hate profits, they hate prosperity, and the carbon tax is typical Marxism. They punish you for being successful while they steal from you. So this sub-agenda also allows the cult to gain control of agriculture, including the food supply, right? So the planetary health diet, which the United Nations is pushing, veganism, United Nations Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals and so on. They're up to several different things there, but one of the things they're up to is this cult has a history of trying to get control of the food supply. They seem to have this obsession with starving people. And if you think of being dramatic, remember that Sadiq Khan, the Fabian socialist mayor of London, we'll talk about the Fabians later, was trying to encourage Londoners to get on the planetary health diet, which is a diet where you're on 40 grams of protein a day. Now, a healthy person, I weigh about 80 kilos, say, right? I should get a minimum of 8. You need 1 gram of protein per kilogram of your body weight per day. That's just for maintenance. If you're building muscle, it's 1.5, right? Or thereabouts if you're an athlete. So I should be getting 80 grams of protein a day. That's just protein. That's not anything else. They want you to live on 40 grams of protein a day. So that's rationing. Now, again, because these are commies, when they start talking about rationing and stuff, watch the fuck out, because you'll be starving before you know it. There's other reasons why they'll do that stuff as well. This is all under the pretense of saving the planet. Of course, this sub-agenda is also connected to the one of the Marxist initiatives of ESG, environmental social governance. I'll be breaking that down a little bit later on. It's just a way of controlling companies and forcing them to go along with Marxism, essentially. Again, there's eugenics undertones to the climate change movement. The literature from the Marxist globalist organizations like the Club of Rome and the United Nations, they state that human populations, particularly in the West, are too numerous for the Earth, right? So there's too many people. Now, if there's too many people, you need to cull them, don't you, like they're cattle. So, when we talk about the Fabians and such later, a lot of these Marxist nutcases going back into history have this obsession with killing anyone who doesn't fit into their system, right? Again, this is all based on a lie, but this is the eugenics undertones. Now, of course, as I was talking last night on X about how important carbon dioxide is for life. And I'm sorry to take you into the chemistry here for a moment, but in a molecule of carbon dioxide, there's 1 carbon atom and 2 oxygen atoms, right? So when you breathe out CO2, mammals breathe out CO2. Most plants absorb that CO2 and they take the carbon atom but throw away the 2 oxygen atoms. And it goes out into the atmosphere. They use the carbon in photosynthesis to give themselves energy and growth and so on, combined with sunlight. Most plants. We take in the oxygen, so there's a nice symbiosis there. So my point is that CO2 is as important for life as oxygen. If you start reducing CO2 to unnatural levels, again, we're back to the same shit I was talking about a moment ago. You've got lower crop yields, starvation, so on. You see where this is going. This, again, Marxism, again, remember, is anti-humanity. It's anti-nature. It's anti the creation. If you're religious, it's anti-God. It kills and causes destruction everywhere. So, as I pointed out there, it's death for the plants, ecosystems, people, etc., because we are all one on this planet in terms of the ecosystem and symbiosis. And again, Marxism likes to fuck around with the naturally occurring equilibria or equilibriums. So here we go. This is watermelon communism, right? So remember this one, right? You can have it. So the climate change movement is watermelon communism. It's green on the outside, commie red on the inside. It's just another manifestation of Marxism hidden as something else. So another wolf in sheep's clothing, right? So the planet itself is being oppressed. No, so whole fucking planets now are being oppressed. Think of the gargantuan egos involved here, where people think they can save entire planets. So as the American stand-up comedian said years ago, this planet has survived floods, ice ages, magnetic reversals of the poles, earthquakes, volcanoes and all that stuff, and these people think some CO2 and some plastic bags is going to trouble the planet. No, the planet is doing okay. As George Carlin said, the people are fucked. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Lanchuk. Well, I hope you're a sir. Jesus, don't offend you. Don't want to presume your gender. Welcome, by the way. Tommy, I hope you're still listening. So, yeah, comment if you're still listening, man. I'll show off a little bit. So here's the Club of Rome. Right, this is just another Marxist group. There's been many Marxist groups that have appeared in the 20th century. They're all about global this. Nice one. Okay, good. Thank you, sir. Sir, thank you. So I said that to someone recently who was called Toby. And Toby was a female. And I was like, fucking hell, how the fuck was I supposed to know that? I only met one other Toby in my whole life, and it was a male, and they got that wrong. Nice one. Thank you, sir. Other sir. Thank you, Tommy. So anyway, here we go. The Club of Rome, right? This is one of the major groups involved in starting this climate change bullshit. It was founded in 1968 by the Italian cult member Aurelio Pecci and British scientist Alexander King. And this guy Pecci or whatever was definitely a Marxist for sure. The first formal meeting was 1970, Bern, Switzerland. According to some, the COR has kind of a think tank relationship with the United Nations. So these nut jobs come up with these ideas, right? So the COR's website from the About Us page, quote, decades of exponential consumption, right, and population growth have come to imperil the Earth's climate and life-supporting systems while reinforcing social and economic inequalities, impoverishing billions globally. Now, even if you're a rookie with Marxism, please, I expect you to spot the clues here. Exponential consumption, so capitalism, materialism, economic inequalities, I shouldn't have to explain that, impoverishing billions globally. Thanks, Tommy. And so you can see all the Marxist cues here, right? Also, another part of their text said the limits of the Earth's biosphere were being reached, destabilizing the foundations of life as we know it. So that's a little bit fucking dramatic, isn't it? It's taking all these little sneaky little digs at capitalism, and it's basically saying that capitalism is going to get us all killed. That's fair enough to say, right? So towards the bottom, the COR wants us to act now to save the Earth, to move towards more equitable economic, finance, and socio-political models. So that's code for let's have a socialist planet, right? Now, again, it's my job. If this kills me, I'm going to educate people to the point where they read that middle paragraph and go, "That's Marxist bullshit. You can't fool me," right? That's the level of awareness we all need to be at if we want to destroy this movement. So here we go, and this is some of the big clues for me that this was Marxism, right? So this is from the cover of the first Global Revolution book. It shows the globe of the Earth with all the countries coloured commie red. This book was published in 1991 when the USSR collapsed, right? So it should be pretty obvious. All the countries red, right? And the word revolution. This is from the section of the book called The Common Enemy of Humanity is Man, page 115. Quote, in searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. These phenomena do constitute a common thread which demands the solidarity of all peoples. If you saw the first presentation, you should recognize that word. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy then is humanity itself. Now, there's a few layers to that, but again, like I said, eugenics, because when you start thinking humanity is the enemy, you start talking about reducing the population. That's what the Bill Gates shit is all about. That's what population replacement is all about. That's what abortion, trans, feminism is all about. You can see it's all about eugenics. There's some people on the earth who are crazy and who think there's too many human beings and they need to be cult like we're fucking animals, essentially. Another level to this as well is that there's a very satanic undertones here, which is that humanity is no good and it's evil. The humanity itself is bad for the earth. It's a very satanic notion that human beings, we were a mistake. Now, whether you're religious or not, it doesn't matter. You have to absorb the concept here, right? Some people are religious, so we have to cater to all of us, to everyone, right? So, but, you know, if you're religious, you clearly see the satanic undertones here, that God made a mistake, pretty much, right? Anyone still listening, just let me know if the audio is still good and everything's good, if you wouldn't mind. I'm going out live on X and on YouTube. Thanks for joining me, and you who joined late. This is part 2 of my presentation on Marxism and my book, Red Pandemic, The Global Marxist Cult. The first part of this presentation is doing really well, by the way. Thanks, Lamb Chop. It's received over like 40,000 views. It's up to 50,000 views, the first one. So far, mission accomplished, you know. There's 2 versions on X, by the way. One of them is the whole session, which was the presentation and the Q&A. It's about an hour, 40 minutes long. But I uploaded the second version with just the Q&A, which is 50 minutes. Now, nobody's too busy not to watch that video. I don't care who you are, what you're doing, where you're based right now. Nobody's too busy. They can't watch a 50-minute video. Please, just do it. Right, it will give you a lot of the weapons and materials to spread this message towards other people. So, thanks, Vanilla. So, the CORs, the Club of Rome's associated publications, include the anti-capitalism entitled Limits to Growth in 1972 and the more overtly Marxist publication, The First Global Revolution, in 1991. Now, the Limits to Growth, one of the versions had the planet coloured green, so you probably wouldn't notice. But the one with the coloured red, the globe red, again, similar thing. But look at the words, Limits to Growth. That comes from the Communist Manifesto, when Karl Marx said that capitalism contained the seeds within itself to sow its own destruction, or words to that effect, pretty much. So they're obsessed with this idea that capitalism is bad and this can't continue. This is where a lot of their logic comes from. Okay, but this is all Marxism. They always leave clues. You just have to know how to spot the clues, right? So these works and other materials endorsed by the COR include themes such as the notion of overpopulation and that human beings are problematic for the world, as I mentioned. The idea we've overindulged living in capitalistic societies, anti-capitalism. Also, that we need an international revolution. So it's an international global revolution. This is Trotskyite rhetoric. There's different types of Marxism, but he was one of the first figures to believe in the idea of having a global revolution. So it's called Trotskyite rhetoric. Okay, if you look at, say, the kind of bullshit that the United Nations come out with, people like Kofi Annan, Ban Ki-moon, and the new guy, Antonio Guterres, they all talk the same bullshit constantly about we need a global revolution to save the planet. We need a global revolution to save the women from being oppressed and all the domestic violence. We need a global revolution to save the animals and to make people eat bugs and leaves. Eating meat is evil. That's why they're trying to get control of the farmers and so on. I think you've all noticed that. Did you all hear about this Beauvais shit? Excuse the pun. They want to stop all the cow farts, right? Because they're killing the planet, all the methane from the cows. Do you ever hear of anything so fucking stupid? But a lot of it, again, is to get control of the food supply. Nations can't defend themselves if everybody's eating leaves. You need meats, animal fats, animal proteins, keep a nation strong. They keep the fertility rates up, and they allow people to physically fight and be physically strong. But I digress. So obviously the COR as well pushes the idea that all countries should be united, solidarity, to deal with these apparent environmental, biological, demographical problems, right? So it's all part of the same thing. It's a tradition in Marxism, the whole idea of one world government that goes right back into its history. So here's another sub-agenda, the LGBTQ trans thing, which has been in our faces for years now. You can't seem to walk down the street now in most cities in the summer without a crotch or someone wearing a fucking gimp mask or someone walking past you with a assless pants. you know, and all this sort of degeneracy, people dressed up as dogs on their hands and knees and stuff. So we're pretty much approaching hell at this stage, I would say. Babylon, essentially, the breakdown of civilization. The LGBTQ people are oppressed by society, right? So the argument here is that, again, when someone's being oppressed, this is the revolutionary energy that makes people think we need to change society to accommodate them, right? So this notion includes including non-binary people, even though they represent only a small fraction of the population. So basically they're saying society needs to change to accommodate just a fraction of the population, that they're being oppressed somehow, you know. So this is the part of the Marxist strategy of activism and waves. There's always something more weird and extreme coming down the tracks with this thing. Yeah, that's another one. Good example. Yeah, the fall of Rome as well. Degeneracy equals destruction and collapse. Absolutely. So the attack on the traditional family, obviously LGBTQ trans is connected in with that. And also the whole idea of the government stepping in between the parents. So now governments have the excuse to take control of the kids with the you know, the social care and so on, where if kids are being oppressed by their parents, you know, kids are being oppressed by their parents because their parents won't let them to change their gender when they're 12 years old. This government can step in. So it's connected with that too. Again, connected to eugenics because it sterilizes the youth through puberty blockers, hormone replacement therapy, and gender reassignment surgery. I actually did an interview with a guy called Dr. Quinton Van Meter in 2018, a very decent man who talked to me about this issue and really opened my eyes to the background to it and what's going on. And what you're doing is with trans, what you're doing is you're trying to treat mental problems with physical surgery. You know, not only is it satanic and stuff, it's just unprofessional bad medicine. It goes way beyond bad medicine and unprofessionalism into being downright evil. But essentially, it's just mental illness. Of course, this sub-agenda combines with feminism, abortion, mass immigration, veganism to reduce populations in affected Western countries. So remember, these are just ingredients in the mix. So mass immigration, trans, feminism, veganism, they all make little impacts on society and help to reduce the amount of mostly Caucasian people in Western countries. This also paves the way for further degeneracy such as MAPs or minor attracted persons, aka pedophiles. And you've all heard this, I'm sure, haven't you, where they've talked about this recently. So, you know, what they're doing is they're just gradually encroaching further and further on what you think is normal. And that's where other terms, they've invented these other terms like heteronormativity and so on, and cisgender. They come up with these terms to distort people's perceptions of reality. So it's revolution in waves. There you go. So I jumped ahead there. Sorry. So that's just from memory. So there you go. Heteronormativity and cisgender to normalize the abnormal. That's essentially what they're trying to do. They're trying to convince you that what was normal before wasn't really normal and all this reality distorting bullshit. It's also connected with Marxian postmodernism, which I'll touch on later a little bit. So this is pretty much the notion that a person can make up their own version of reality and identify as whatever they want. So if I tell you all tomorrow that I am the sexiest bastard in the world, or I am the reincarnate, I am the fucking king of the leprechauns in Ireland, and you all should bow down to me and give me all your fucking money, you have to respect my opinion because that's what I believe, right? That's my truth, you see, and you all have to respect that. And if you don't respect my truth, you are oppressing me, and I can be as delusional as I want. That's why now we've got grown men walking around now, these ugly looking hairy armed Adam's apple big jaw men walking around in high heels and makeup, you know, these freaks walking around the place, and we're supposed to respect their opinions. This is postmodernism. I can make up my own reality, basically. So essentially what it does is it normalizes delusion and insanity. That's what it does. It's normalizing psychopathic behavior. So I talked about the last presentation the importance of oppressor and oppressed, the whole class struggle concept. So some of the basics is there, but this is a bit more of a going into a bit more detail on this. So one of the things that happens is the relationship becomes inverted, right? So again, it's based on a lie, but the oppressed becomes the oppressor, right? So an example of this would be, say, in feminism, the lie says that men have oppressed women, and it becomes justifiable now for women. So the idea that men have abused women and now it's okay for women to abuse men. So the oppressed becomes the oppressor and gets revenge, essentially, right? So you see this pattern happening all across the West. It explains a lot of the things that have been happening, like, for example, the fact that immigrants coming into Western countries often come in with this murderous sentiment. Yeah, some of them are sociopaths, but there's that general hatred you see towards their hosts, which is really quite bizarre. That's coming from Marxism. Another example is the black on white crime in the States. A lot of black people have been brainwashed in America to think that they're the oppressed class, and that leads to this murderous attitude towards white people. In South Africa, you can see it to a very extreme degree with the murders happening there, the genocide essentially of white people. So because they become inverted, the oppressed class, right, because of the brainwashing, they also ironically become ungrateful and privileged, since criticism of those in the oppressed class is not permitted in a Marxist contaminated social environment. So you're not allowed to criticize somebody if they have oppressed status, because they're victims, you see. So with no one to keep them in check, this leads to ego inflation and the degeneration of behavior. So it becomes socially unacceptable to criticize females because of feminism, because it says that women have suffered so much, you're not allowed to make them suffer anymore. Then it becomes socially unacceptable to criticize females, and that's not a good thing. All of us in our lives, male and female, need to be kept in check in our lives so we don't get big heads and get big fucking egos. But it becomes, imagine me personally, imagine for a laugh here, imagine it became socially unacceptable to criticize heterosexual white Irish males. That puts me in the oppressed class all of a sudden, and if any of you say anything mean or use any hurty words towards me, you're a bad person, right? Even if I'm being an asshole and my behavior is unacceptable, you're not allowed to criticize me. That's bad, because I will continue to be an asshole. There's no reason for me to stop, and the ego gets bigger, and we see that constantly with people in oppressed groups. It makes them a little bit crazy in the head thanks to the brainwashing. So you see the behavior degenerates, it leads to ego inflation, which often leads to aggression as well. So because they feel that they're oppressed, they actually go on the attack and they want revenge. And this is all based on a lie, remember. So in South Africa now, there are people going around killing white farmers because they feel that white people are the enemy in Africa, which is a lie. So it's because of stuff like this. This is where the revolutionary element and division is created. It's emotional brainwashing, and so a lot of it comes from revenge, essentially. So here's another part of the whole class struggle thing. It's another problem with it: the idea of false narratives and cherry picking. So the idea of creating false narratives and cherry picking to demonize the oppressor class or the target group, right? So an example of what I'm talking about is the idea that the white race is the worst race in the history of humanity. The white race engaged in slavery and oppressive imperialism more than any other racial group. Now that is an absolute lie. That is a despicable, racist, evil lie. That's no basis in reality at all. Zero. Right? Now, the only people who believe that to be the case are people who don't understand history, because all racial groups in the past engaged in slavery and murder towards their own people. Even the idea that white people did it more than others isn't not true at all. And I mentioned in the book, you had slavery in Central America with the Mayans and the Incans. The Incas, the North American Indian tribes, butchered and took each other as slaves and sexual slaves. All across Africa. I mean, certain parts of Africa nowadays, they'll still eat you. They've been killing each other going back millennia, long before the Buddha people arrived in South Africa. They've been killing each other, and that goes for all other racial groups and ethnic groups as well. So it's a complete lie, and it's nonsense. And you've heard the terms in America, and when Marxism becomes more widespread in society, you hear these terms of white privilege and white people are disease. That is racism. That's essentially what that is. It's racist incendiary language. It's all based on a lie in order to attack the oppressor, right? So this generates hatred towards the oppressor, which then leads to attacks and eventually murder and genocide. And I mentioned South Africa again is a very extreme example of what happens when Marxism is now in the driving seat. You've got a majority black government, thanks to the African National Council in South Africa after apartheid. Since then, it's just been gradual, incremental hatred and murder. Now, white people in South Africa, despite the fact they actually built the place, are now the inferior class, and the country's going to hell. And the black people who are brainwashed in Marxism are literally killing the only people who could fix their society. So let me now actually here's a simple graph I put together about class struggle. Now this, to my analysis, is right to the core of why the world is going to hell. It's the class struggle brainwashing and the emotional reactions it produces in people. I put this in the book, but it's far deep into the book. I don't know if many people have gotten that far. I'm waiting for somebody who's read the book to contact me and say, my God, man, you nailed it. Because that's it. This is it. This is why half the planet is crazy, okay? So let me lay out some of the details here. In the class struggle concept, like I said, you've got the oppressor and the oppressed. So another way of saying the oppressor is the controller, dominator, perpetrator, user, master. The oppressed, the controlled, dominated, victim, used, slave, etc. Okay, so clearly there's a dichotomy going on here. And you can see the top right and top left, you can see the emojis, right? So the oppressor, that's supposed to be angry, but that's the best image I could find. And oppressed is obviously sad, right? So in the next image, this is basically what it does to people's brains. So the oppressor on the left, again, to use feminism as an example, according to feminist propaganda, the males are bad and you should hate them, right? The oppressor deserves your hatred, judgment, ostracization, all the so-called masculine emotions, right? In other words, hate. So you hate the oppressor, okay? The oppressed, the victim in the equation, you should have all the feminine, soft emotions like sympathy, empathy, compassion, and so on. The so-called feminine emotions. Now, this has nothing to do with male and female, right? Men and women can both express feminine and masculine emotions. I'm not picking just on women here. Please don't react that way. I'm talking about the brainwashing. We all have masculine and feminine emotions, right? And we use them in different scenarios. But this brainwashing, it makes the person's brain split into these two areas where you've got hatred for the oppressor and love for the oppressed. And I say love because it's not really love. Because when you treat someone as being a victim and you treat them as being oppressed, and it's all about treating them perhaps too well just because of the group they belong to, that's not love. You're actually doing them a disservice. That's not love. Love is not making somebody weak and disempowering them. That's not love. That's part of the lie of Marxism. This is not actually love. It's actually destroying. So when you put someone in the oppressed class, you're actually disempowering them, not empowering them. This is right to the core of the issue. And actually, I'll go back one moment. Before I continue, the reason I think I'm the only one that I know of, the only analyst on this subject that I know of in the world who spotted this, because by accident I've discovered it because of some of my other knowledge bases. I wasn't always interested in politics and geopolitics. When I was younger, I was interested in things like spirituality, alternative belief systems, the occult, and so on. And one of the concepts I heard in the occult, and this is the kind of an addendum to this slide here, is that this is a concept. Now, I don't like going into that stuff too much because a lot of people aren't interested in it and they get impatient. But let me just put this on the table for you, right? My back is a bit sore here. Basically, there's an idea in the occult about mind control, that one of the best ways to control someone's mind is to traumatize them, to discombobulate them, to make them unsettled in an extreme way. And one way to do that is to get a person's force their consciousness, their mind, into a lower level of function. Okay, so I mean, as in not in control, not calm, not lucid, not conscious, not aware. Force them down into a lower level. And what's an easy way of doing that? Get them emotionally charged, particularly conflicting emotions. And to use an example of what I'm talking about, yeah, in a sense, yeah, a split, but let's not go into that quite. I'm just talking about emotions, but in a sense, it does kind of split the personality, but not in the conventional sense. But good point, thank you. It causes a split in emotional states. And they're very extreme contrasting emotions, as you can see, hate and love simultaneously. I'll give you an example. If anyone's ever gone through a really bad breakup, and I've been through quite a lot, where you're in that phase where you still love the person, but you think you hate them, it's horrible. You're all over the place. You're not in control at all. That's a good example of what I'm talking about. And a lot of people can relate to that, particularly if you've been through a few relationships. If you're a really lucid person like me, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's quite traumatic. You're not in control. And that's what I noticed by accident, because of my knowledge of the occult from my youth. This concept of class struggle brainwashes people and actually does that to their brains. Now that is, for me, the best explanation why half the planet's crazy with this shit. I haven't heard anybody explain it in this way. Yeah, and I think I'm right. I'm willing to be proven wrong, but I'm the only one who's put that out. It's just a theory, but you're not going to get that kind of analysis from a conventional psychologist, because they don't have any knowledge about the occult. So how would they know? I'm sure they have their own theories, but I thought I'd mention that one. Maybe it'll be proven right in time, but we have to explain why the indoctrination is so potent. This is certainly one of the factors, and there's others as well, but I will move on to another area here. So moving to some other concepts. If anyone's listened, by the way, on X, if you wouldn't mind retweeting this live, if you wouldn't mind, I'll have the video version. I'll be pimping that out as usual. I'm going to put that in the tweet of the original video. So anyone who doesn't know, if you go to my, if you're on YouTube, you can see the part 1 presentation, Dallas presentation, my videos. If you're on X, go to my pinned tweet. Has part 1 there, and I'm going to put this version in that thread so people can see it, hopefully, because as I was saying before, 45 minutes is barely enough to scratch the surface of this ideology. So now here's the concept of equality and equity, and this has become, you hear a lot of talk about this nowadays, and I didn't have the time to fit this into the original presentation. So what is you hear them using these words, right? Equality and equity. So you know you're dealing with the Marxists when they bring up these concepts. So basically, here's a quote from, I just grabbed this from some random website. So, equality means each individual or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities. Equity, on the other hand, recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. So this is basically Marxism trying to create artificial equality, uniformity, even where none exists. So, there's the natural order. Marxism wants to fuck it up as usual based on this crazy idea. And you can see the image at the bottom. You can see equality on the left, equity on the right. And you can see in the case of equity, you know, their different attributes, in this case their height, are being compensated for by these little platforms to make them all equal. So it's an intervention to create this artificial outcome. Since Marxism the cult of Marxism, or the ideology, attempts to eradicate oppression. It considers hierarchies unethical. You know, it wants to eliminate class distinction. So it doesn't like hierarchies, because if someone's higher than someone else, the person in the lower position must obviously being oppressed somehow. So Marxism is obsessed with this idea of trying to destroy, get rid of oppression whenever it can. Marxism also denies the differences between races and cultures. Also, it pushes the idea that and sex and social status as well. It's always trying to deny the difference between races, cultures, sexual orientation, so on, and gender is a social construct, all that bullshit. The ideology also has a tendency to destroy anything positive in society, including brilliance, achievement, so on, prosperity or excellence. And these are the things that allow civilization to exist and prosper. It is also decidedly anti-nature. Marxism is against nature. It's against the way things naturally work, and it's against hierarchies, naturally occurring hierarchies. So Marxism, basically, to achieve all of that, to push its will on everything, it uses the concept of equity, which is compensating for the differences between these groups to produce an artificial equality of outcome. So it compensates for the differences between groups or individuals, whatever the scenario it is. It tries to force them all equal, even though they're not equal. That obviously means that whoever's in a higher position needs to be pulled down, and whoever's in a lower position needs to be pushed up. Right? So this is tampering with the naturally occurring dynamics or inequality in society produces destructive effects. What a shocker, as the history of the ideology shows us. So if you mess around with nature, I'll go back to that slide. So you mess around with nature, it's always destructive. Things are the way they are for a reason, and Marxism has a tendency of tampering around with these dynamics. And think of it this way. When the person who deserves to be here, right, is brought down, it's demoralizing, right? You take away their incentive for being successful, wealthy, ingenious, efficient, etc., whatever. And this person here who is lower is being brought up, and they're both treated equal when they're not. The one in the lower position is being brought up when they don't deserve to be. Perhaps maybe they're lazy. Maybe they don't have the attributes to put them there. That's why we have the problem nowadays of so it's demoralizing for the achiever, and the underachiever is being elevated. So again, this one might develop an ego, right, when they shouldn't have one, and this one here is being demoralized. It's incredibly destructive for the fabric of society. And in recent times, you've all seen the famous DEI hires. We'll get to DEI in a moment, but people being put into positions of authority when they don't deserve to be, when they don't have any skills. They're being put into positions of authority because they might be gay or black or trans or whatever. They're not in there on their merits. They're in there because of the social group they belong to. So here's DEI, right? So another Marxian initiative being pushed in government, industry, in the corporate world, etc. So diversity, traditionally in Marxism, is this idea of there's too much homogeneity. There needs to be more of a mix. So really that's code for there's too many white people, particularly heterosexual white males, right? Because remember, heterosexual white males are the evil business owners, the oppressors, right? The heterosexual white males are the ones who oppress women in the patriarchy. Heterosexual white males are the ones who led to all the imperialism around the world, right? Heterosexual white males are the worst. That's why, like I said in the first presentation, this is the only type of human being who's not allowed to be oppressed, who's not allowed in the oppressed class. So people like myself are shit out of luck. We're not allowed to be in the oppressed class. So we are the enemy. And one of the things diversity does is take in every corporate situation and so on, in the past, they used to be all heterosexual white males. Now it's anything but that. That's diversity, right? So part of diversity too is to put basically those from the oppressed groups into positions of power and influence, which again helps Marxism, doesn't it? Because they're more like, say, a Leo Varadkar in Ireland, right? He's what is he again? He's half Irish, half Indian, and 100% gay, right? So he's in a position of authority and influence. He's more likely to support Marxism and Marxist agendas because he's from an oppressed category, right? Now, you've also got equity. So like we just talked about, the idea to compensate for the naturally occurring differences between individuals and groups. And the third one, inclusion, drag as many people into the collective as possible as a form of coercion. You have to go along with the ideology or else. Put everybody in there. So diversity, equity, and inclusion. The effects of this Marxist initiative, of course, include the cult gains more control. Economic collapse as well is another one, because again, you're destroying the fabric of society. It leads to economic collapse, which is very Marxist. And it's also an attack on excellence and achievement. Marxism seems to like to attack anything beautiful in our world, just as a matter of course. You've also got ESG, environmental social governance, which is another Marxian initiative being pushed in government, industry, the corporate world, etc. It's connected with the climate change movement. Like I said, it's a way of coercing organizations, corporations, etc. to make sure they support Marxism by giving them an ESG score or rating, right? So if they're not going green, for example, advocating climate change movement, their ESG score will be affected. So you're being punished for not going along with Marxism. That's all it is. Now look at the symbols on the right there. It doesn't look very Marxist, does it? But when you see the environment, okay, climate change movement, sure. Social, yeah, could possibly be Marxist governance. Well, that's just power. The rookie, a person with no knowledge of Marxism, may not spot this is Marxist, looking at the kind of symbols and language that's being used. The effects, again, include the cult gains more control, economic collapse, and so on. So remember, a lot of this stuff is being pushed in Western countries, like the climate change agenda. So again, this is going outside the scope of this presentation. But remember, the Eastern countries, the new communist-aligned countries, are not playing these games. This is really on Western countries, again, to cause economic collapse and weakness. So here's another example of another Marxist concept, right? That's hidden. It's in the Irish education system. You can see it on the left, SPHE, or Social Personal Health Education. So this is an initiative being introduced. Anyone listening, by the way, just let me know if you're still listening, and let me know if my audio is okay. I can't hear myself, so my voice probably sounds weird because I've got these plugs in, but they're not really working right now. So this is from the curriculum.ie website. So, quote, learning in SPHE aims to help students to build self-awareness. Thanks, Vanilla. Thanks again. So, learning in SPHE aims to... Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. But two sirs. Tommy, sir. Thank you. So, learning in SPHE aims to help students to build self-awareness and positive self-worth. Oh, my God. Develop the knowledge, understanding, skills, dispositions, and values that will support them to lead fulfilling and healthy lives. Isn't that lovely? Feeling empowered to create, nurture, and maintain respectful and loving relationships with self and others. Enhance their capacity to contribute positively to society. Now, this is not from the official documentation. I was too lazy to find that, but this is a reasonable overview here. So the effects of this obviously includes the cult. The Marxist cult itself increases its membership by brainwashing kids, right? So they're indoctrinating kids to become good little global citizens. That's why they're teaching climate change in the schools. That's why they're teaching trans. That's why they're getting the little kids used to drag queen story time. That's why they're brainwashing particularly teenagers with this idea of consent training, right, which is just coming from feminist propaganda that all males are potential rapists. So young males need to be conditioned into this notion of consent. It's also connected in with mass immigration as well, but I don't want to go into that just now. But look at the symbology on that image to the left. Actually, the next slide, maybe I went full screen with that today. No, okay, sorry, I guessed wrong. I'll go back to that slide. Just wanted to show you something. So look at the symbology on the left. Okay, so you have the person, you got the all-seeing eye, you got a very symbology above there, and you got the Taoism, the yin-yang symbol of Taoism there. So a little bit occultic and a little bit creative. I haven't done a deep dive into that. But to the bottom right, actually, you can see it, the head with a light bulb inside it. That symbol's been used before. I think the New Statesman magazine used that on a few occasions, I think, which was created by the Fabian Society. We'll talk about the Fabians later, but it's the idea of being woke. You know, what Marxism is wokeness, right? You're an evolved being by being a good little global citizen, essentially. You know, it's part of a global awakening. That's where this woke stuff comes from. So in the first presentation, if you saw it, I talked a lot about Ireland and some of the evidence that Marxism was affecting Ireland. So here's a rundown of the NGO non-profit complex. So here's some of the Marxist groups in tiny little Ireland. This is the Republic of Ireland, remember, with a population of 5.38 million approximately. Population Dublin is like 2 million or something, over 2 million, I can't remember, but it's a very small place. So you've got, for example, the Irish Network Against Racism, which is the Irish branch of the European Network Against Racism, the Immigrant Council of Ireland. You've also got the Migrant Rights Centre Ireland. Quote from their website, MRCI is a national organisation working to advance the rights of migrant workers and their families at risk of exploitation, social exclusion and discrimination. So that's pretty much socialism, anti-capitalism and mass immigration and anti-racism combined in one sentence, right? So you have to congratulate them for being good at what they do. Now again, a rookie would know that this is Marxist, okay? It also works with, quote, migrants and their families in Ireland to promote justice, empowerment and equality. Right, so the key words are right there. They're right there. But if someone doesn't know Marxism, you would never know that this is Marxist, right? And see the symbols on the right, they don't really give anything away that they're necessarily Marxist in origin. But the words do, the language does. Here's another one, COLIV, right? So it says global solidarity in action. So COLIV is an Irish language or Gaelic language word meaning together, aka united, solidarity, etc. From their website, COLIV is the Irish Association of International Development Workers and Volunteers. We build and mobilise community around global justice issues. COLIV nurtures and supports work for change locally and globally and advocates for a world beyond injustice. So its work is underpinned by a commitment to global citizenship education. Wow, so we're going to be global citizens now, which deepens understanding of the structural causes of inequality and unsustainability. So more of the same shit. There's not enough equity in the world and also unsustainability. Remember limits to growth. Club of Rome earlier. Same bullshit repackaged, okay? This shit is everywhere. It's the same shit over and over again. So there's the LGBT organisation, some of them in Ireland. LGBT Ireland belong to NXF, National LGBT Federation, Outhouse LGBT Community Resource Centre, Transgender Equality Network Ireland. Then you've got, this is for another one, is Shout Out. So here's from their website, okay? Shout Out is a registered charity committed to improving life for LGBTQ plus people by educating school students, parents and guardians, teachers, youth workers and workplaces on LGBTQ issues. Since 2012, we've completed over 1,800 student workshops. That means we've spoken directly to over 54,000 students. Now these fuckers, even if they're exaggerating the numbers, that's a tremendous amount. Let's cut it in half. 25,000 students, 27,000, right? That's still a lot. That's an awful lot of brainwashing going on. You can see these NGOs are working with the schools and the government. They're all working together to brainwash the kids into Marxism and this degeneracy, right? So you'd see on the right, top right, you can see Leo Varadkar, the gay Indian, former Irish Prime Minister, with the t-shirt Broad. So Broad is the Irish word, Irish language word for pride. So this is a pride march, as you can see from the colours. Here are some of the green environmentalist groups. So you can see Stop Climate Chaos, Climate Ambassador, Friends of the Earth, Irish Environmental Network, Environmental Protection Agency, Environmental Pillar, Friends of the Irish Environment. You know, this is tiny Ireland. And remember, even if it were true, which it isn't, that CO2 is controlling the weather patterns and causing global warming and so on, Ireland is such a small country. It's 7 million for the whole island. There's only one major city really, which is Dublin. This CO2 output is infinitesimal. It's nothing. So even if it was true that this was a major global issue, remember China's CO2 output is probably like 400 times more than Ireland, 500 times. The population is 1.4 billion in China. They've got loads of major cities, and they're throwing up coal plants, gas-fired power plants left, right, and centre, and nuclear plants, but they don't pollute. But the other ones do, and they don't give a shit. And yet we have to stop our CO2 emissions. It's nonsense. It's a big subject into itself, but it's all bullshit. Here's another one. Here's some of the feminist groups, right? So you've got Irish Feminist Network, National Women's Council of Ireland, Women's Aid, Action Aid. So another one is ROSA, right? So you can see the logo on the left, Reproduction Rights Against Oppression, Sexism and Austerity. They're so cringy, but they think they're really clever. So this is from their website, named after revolutionary socialist Rosa Luxemburg and civil rights campaigner Rosa Parks as well. We are an international network of socialist feminists established by women, LGBTQI, young people of colour activists fighting all forms of misogyny and sexism linked to the fight for rent control and public housing. Oh my God. The fight for decent and equal pay, the climate justice movement, and fighting racism, transphobia, and the far right. So as many Marxist catchphrases as you can fit in there. Help us build a socialist feminist movement allied with the working class and oppressed of this world to struggle against all exploitation and oppression and fight for a socialist future free from violence, wealth inequality, and environmental destruction. Wow. Where do I sign up? They sound like they're going to fix everything. Here's another one. So this one's called Radicaline, right? So those of you who if you speak English but you're not Irish, some of these words are going to look a little bit strange. So Radicaline, so this name is a Marxian portmanteau. So it's like creating a new word from two words, right? So you combine the word radical with colleen, which is the Irish Gaelic language word for girl. So radicaline, so radical, colleen, radicaline. This is from their website's homepage. Quote, we are a women's liberation group made up of Irish and migrant women who recognize that women's oppression is based on the material reality of our biological sex. So in other words, women are being oppressed because they're women. This group was created to counter the misogynistic narratives and practices in our culture. Our group provides advocacy and community to women interested in campaigning for women's liberation. Wow. Where do I sign up? So we need to save those women. Women of the world unite. You've nothing to lose but your chains, right? In fact, one of the feminist groups in Ireland in the past were called Chains or Change, I think. So basically, stay a prisoner or have a revolution and be free. Get out of the kitchen. Stop having babies for your man. Get out there, travel the world and have a career and do all this exciting stuff. You don't want to be oppressed by being a housewife, etc. So here's some of the commie uni courses in Ireland. So in Dublin, you have three of the main institutions we have in Dublin City are Trinity College Dublin, Dublin City University and University College Dublin. There's approximately 70,000 students between them, to my knowledge. And you see images on the right. Just a very quick overview. So Trinity College, this is all in my book, obviously. The Trinity College offers a postgraduate certificate in diversity and inclusion in further education and training, a postgraduate 2-year full-time course called Gender and Women's Studies. Sign me up. An undergraduate course in gender and sexuality in early modern Europe. An undergraduate course in Stalinism and society in Eastern Europe. It also has an equality office and a branch of the Workers' Party, as far as I know. So Trinity College, yet another hotbed for these this Marxist degeneracy. Here's another one. Dublin. This is Trinity College Dublin is right in the centre, in the heart of the city. Dublin City University is a little bit in the north side. So they offer an MA in Sexuality Studies, a postgraduate certificate in Sexuality Education and Sexual Wellbeing, right? An MA in Refugee Integration, an undergraduate in Climate and Environmental Sustainability, an online Equality, Diversity and Inclusion course, and it has a Centre of Excellence for Diversity and Inclusion. So that's 2 universities well and truly captured by Marxism. Here's the University College Dublin, which offers a course module in Feminism and Gender Justice, an MA in Gender Studies, an MSc Masters in Equality Studies, an MSc in Climate Change, and a BSc 4-year social justice course. So the course description for the MA in Gender Studies says this under the Careers and Employability heading, quote, graduates have become central members of local communities, key members of NGOs, employers and public sector agencies, education and media. So the university is pumping out these people fucked up in the head with Marxism who are going into positions of authority across Irish society, right? And obviously they're sympathetic to Marxism, at the minimum sympathetic, at least familiar to it, or they could be full-blown fanatics. And these people are fucking everywhere in Irish society. Now in this section here, I'm going to go into various groups and incarnations. And again, the book is a monster at over 600 pages long. So this is just some of the key elements from that. So we've got, to start us off here, the infamous Fabian Society. So this is goes right back in history to 1884. It's a very important group. So established in 1884, they branches in the United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, and Sicily of all places. They're very well connected internationally. They established the British Labour Party, and they're officially a think tank of the same. They established the LSE, London School of Economics and Political Science, in 1895. The British Prime Ministers Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and Keir Starmer are all Fabians. They're all members of the Fabian Society. All Labour Party leaders, all of the top members in the Labour Parties, going right back to Clement Attlee after World War II in particular, all of them have been Fabians. Also, the London Mayor Sadiq Khan is a member of the Fabian Society. So this isn't a made-up conspiracy group. They're real. They have a website. You can check it out. I think it's fabians.org. So they're out in the open. They really are an openly Marxist group. The Fabians are really interesting because they're a little bit different in terms of their tactics, right? So they want revolution, but their methods are a little bit different. So they're not about the workers' overthrow of the system. It's a little bit different to that. It's not like a violent overthrow. It's a bit more sneaky. So here's the Fabian coat of arms, right? So it's essentially malevolence disguised as benevolence, a wolf in sheep's clothing. So it comes disguised as one of you, one of your own, as a friend, but it's really a vicious predator disguised as the harmless prey. In short, this is a hostile attack on unsuspecting victims using stealth. Now, this is important to absorb because when I say communism is taking over the world, people say, what are you talking about? There's no workers' revolution. We still have rich people. We still have elites running the government. What are you talking about? This isn't communism. They'll say this isn't communism either because there's no communist army coming over the hill, right? Like, in the North Korean War, the Vietnam War and so on. They're saying, what do you mean it's communism? This is a different type of communism. It's sneaky. It's about ideas. It's about knowledge. It's about changing the culture towards communism. It's a little bit different. So it's a little bit sneakier and much more difficult to spot and understand. So the Fabian model describes why the Western civilization is collapsing. Unfortunately, people can't see it because they don't have the knowledge. So here's the Fabian window. So this is a stained glass window located at the School of Economics. It was designed by one of the Fabian Society, the Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw. It was commissioned in 1910. Okay, it was unveiled by the UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, who's a Fabian himself, at a ceremony in April 2006. In the window, you can see three Fabians, Shaw, Webb, and E.R. Peace, are pictured reforging the earth on an anvil using hammers. As you can see on the right, we'll have a close-up in a moment. But to the right, you can see the earth is on an anvil, right? So the earth is being heated up, right? So they're heating up the earth to hit it with hammers to change the earth. So they're talking about changing how the world works, which is exactly what's happened, right? Everyone should be able to see that. And above the earth, you can see the Fabian coat of arms. So what they're saying in that symbol is, the last sentence there almost says, using Masonic hammers, they are shattering the earth to bits to remold the earth as they see fit to build a new world, right? That's what they're showing us in this image. And so above the world, you can see the Fabian, the coat of arms, and we'll zoom in here. At the bottom, you can see all of the Fabians praying to their scriptures, right? Now, for years, I used to think that the New World Order was about the Jews or about the Freemasons or the Knights of Malta or the Temple of Set or the Ordo Templi Orientis or the Satanists and this and that. But it's just communism. That's all it is. They've actually been telling us that that's what it is, and they love it when we put the blame in other areas. They're masters at hiding their intentions. So across the top of the window, you can see remolded nearer to the heart's desire. This is from a quatrain by the Persian poet, I think Omar Khayyam. As like a romantic poem or something, but that's where they got the idea from. Before I continue, there's another thing I didn't include before I move on to the next slide properly. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, I put this in the book, these were British prime ministers, both made statements in the 90s and in the 90s talking about a new world order. And everyone thought, oh, a new world order, the elites. But it went over people's heads that they were Fabians, you know. And people start talking about the international bankers, and they start going off the deep end. They completely missed the reference. It's just international communism. That's all it is. There's something else I forgot to include. I just realized I didn't include it. The Fabian coat of arms is a wolf in sheep's clothing, but their logo was a tortoise, right? Why? Because a tortoise moves really slowly, right? The Fabians are not in a rush to take over. They gradually make progress like a walking tortoise. So, okay, I'm hitting you with some animals here. A wolf in sheep's clothing is their methodology. It's stealth. It's something evil disguised as something good, but the tortoise represents gradual progress, constant progress, right? So it's not a violent, immediate overthrow. It's gradually turning the culture towards communism to brainwash people into wanting to go along with this global agenda. So again, Fabianism describes more accurately why the world's falling apart, the Fabian method of takeover. So here's H.G. Wells. The world-famous English author H.G. Wells was a member of the Fabian Society from 1903 to 1908, so he wasn't in it the whole time. He did try to take over the leadership from George Bernard Shaw and Sidney Webb at one stage, but he was a bit of a head case, crazy guy. So Wells was a Darwinist and lifelong advocate of socialism and eugenics. He believed that collectivism should become the new opiate of the masses, the new religion. Now, a lot of the Fabians thought just like him. Here's from his 1940 book, New World Order, quote, "This new and complete revolution we contemplate can be defined in a very few words. It is outright world socialism, scientifically planned and directed, and sedulous expansion of the educational organization to the ever-growing demands of the new order." Right? So he's talking about using the education system to create this new world order. right? And the idea of scientifically planned, that comes from, scientific socialism and so on, that this is a scientific method of creating a better world, a better society, a utopia. Here's another very interesting quote. The reorganization of the world has at first to be mainly the work of a movement or a party or a religion or cult, whatever we choose to call it. We may call it the new liberalism or the new radicalism or whatnot. It will not be a close-knit organization towing the party line and so forth. It may be very loose-knit and many-faceted. Now that sums up the Fabian mindset very, very well. You see the way he says the new liberalism or the new radicalism, they will call it anything but what it is to keep you guessing, right? It's very old Marxist tactic. And he said also very loose-knit and many-faceted. So that means that's what we're dealing with now in society. There's no one group in Ireland that's causing this. It's loads of groups with lots of people, and they're all brainwashed. And the same thing goes for the US, Australia, the UK, or even non-English speaking countries and so on. It's always the same. It's the Fabian model take over. Here's another quote which is a little bit disturbing. Countless people, from Maharajas to millionaires and from Pukka Sahibs to pretty ladies, will hate the New World Order and will die protesting against it. When we attempt to estimate its promise, we have to bear in mind the stress of a generation or so of malcontents. So even back then, he's talking about how people are going to try to fight back and people are going to die because, they're trying to fight back from the system. Now, I don't think I included any G.B. Shaw quotes, which I should have, but George Bernard Shaw was another psychopath, degenerate eugenicist who he believed a lot of people needed to die to build this new socialist utopia, this new world order. A lot of the Fabians had these eugenics ideas about them. Maybe I'll include that another time. So here's the Frankfurt School. The infamous Frankfurt School is originally the Institute for Marxism, and it was renamed Institute for Social Research. So again, a little bit sneaky. It was established at the University of Frankfurt, Germany in 1923. Let me know, folks, if my audio is still loud enough, because I'm just a little bit late here. It's midnight here and I'm trying not to piss off the neighbours. But just let me know if it's too low. So it was established at the University of Frankfurt, Germany in 1923. Thank you. So they had to get out of Germany because of obviously the Nazis coming to power. Because they were Jewish Marxists. The Nazis didn't like Jews, they didn't like Marxists, so they had to skedaddle out of Europe, and they arrived at Columbia University in 1934, and then they proceeded to contaminate the American academic system. So you had, it was composed of these Marxist intellectuals, right? Intellectual Marxists like Herbert Marcuse, Erich Fromm, Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, and a bunch of other various members at different times. So it's often been said that this group kind of fused the ideas of Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, Antonio Gramsci. So they used Karl Marx's economic ideas with Sigmund Freud's psychological ideas and the tactical ideas of Antonio Gramsci. So their work, so Antonio Gramsci was the one who was famous for the idea of the long march through the institutions, right? He wrote it in his prison notebooks. Benito Mussolini put him in prison in Italy, and when he was in prison, he wrote these prison notebooks, which got translated years later. And he promoted the idea of turning the culture towards Marxism by slowly infiltrating all of the institutions within society. So their work, the Frankfurt School's work, paved the way for destructive concepts such as critical theory, critical race theory, and what's called cultural relativism. So I'm sure you've heard about critical theory, critical race theory. Cultural relativism is the idea of that no culture is better than the other culture. This is pretty much the Marxists were paving the way for today, this world we have today, where we have the clash of cultures, and the Marxists are so obsessed with the idea of equality, but we know that cultures and so on aren't equal. So cultural relativism is a way of them disarming us. It's a way of shutting up people like myself who will say that Western civilization is better than third world civilization and we should be mixed together. That's connected in with that. It's one of the factors in this. Marcuse was the prominent member of the Frankfurt School. I'm not going to go through all their opinions and books. It would be a waste of time. But Marcuse was the prominent member of the Frankfurt School. He advocated the biased pro-Marxist political and social environment of liberating tolerance, which meant, quote, intolerance against movements from the right and toleration of movements from the left, the withdrawal of toleration of speech and assembly from groups and movements which promote aggressive policies, armament, chauvinism, discrimination on the grounds of race and religion, or which oppose the extension of public services, social security, medical care, etc. And this is from, I think, his essay, Repressive Tolerance in 1965. So look at all those keywords there. He's basically saying that anyone who is not supporting Marxist causes shouldn't be allowed free speech. Does that ring any bells? Hate speech, hate crime, right? It's the same tactic being used. If you, like I said, if you want to start up a group where trannies can meet up every weekend, or you get out in the street and promote BLM, or you want to promote abortion or something, you can have all the free speech you want. But if you go against Marxism, you won't be allowed any more free speech in the future. That's the society we're moving towards. And again, because of the level of ignorance about Marxism, people just can't see it. Another example, like I mentioned in the first part of the presentation, was the protest exclusion zone law around abortion clinics. Right, so anyone opposing abortion, protesting, is not going to be allowed to do that. It's going to be illegal. They don't want any girls or females going to get an abortion having second thoughts. So they want to keep these evil far right people away. It's a very typical Marxist tactic. So Marcuse said this as well: one can rightfully speak of a cultural revolution since the protest is directed toward the whole cultural establishment. Here's the key part: the traditional idea of revolution and the traditional strategy of revolution has ended. These ideas are old-fashioned. What we must undertake is a type of diffuse and dispersed disintegration of the system. So that's sneaky talk, right? He's saying that the old way of revolution is done. We need to have a new way where we kind of wiggle in there, right? Diffuse and disperse, disintegration. So they're trying to break up the system, right, with subversive means. He said that in 1937. Now, I mentioned the Frankfurt School, I mentioned Gramsci, Marcuse. They're all part of the cult. They all want this globalist communist revolution, but they're contributing towards it in different ways. And the movement as a whole has been progressively learning. Every single type of Marxist cult member over the years who've put in their own theories and thoughts have made the overall movement stronger. And that's why we are getting our asses kicked in Western countries, because this movement has a long tradition of subversion and conspiracy, and the average person just can't see it. So now, neo-Marxists like Marcuse gave up on the traditional class struggle concept of the rich against the poor, or the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, because the working class were now too comfortable within the capitalist system. So they still want their revolution. So how could they do this? So to find a replacement for the working class, Marcuse suggested creating oppressed classes throughout society, which provided the activist revolutionary element. So they needed new people to fit that role of the oppressed, because without the oppressed, you can't have revolution. Somebody needs to feel like they're being oppressed to make all this revolution work. He suggested that this could be a coalition of various oppressed groups. Lovely. Quote, the substratum of the outcasts and outsiders, the exploited and persecuted of other races and other colours, the unemployed and the unemployable, etc. That's just one of the quotes from One Dimensional Man. So here's another important element of Marxism in the book that I mentioned called postmodernism, right? So here's a quote from Dr. Michael Sugrue. This is from his presentation entitled Jean-François Lyotard, The Postmodern Condition. Quote, postmodernism generates a philosophy of resistance, of negation. It is not a logically coherent system. It is systematic distrust, organized skepticism, systematic suspicion, which is an excellent summary of what it is. So there's another intellectual outgrowth of Marxism. So again, we're back to the same thing. These are not, they're not commie soldiers. They're not workers with the pitchforks. These are fucking academics, right? They're one of the worst perpetrators of this ideology we've ever had. So a form of philosophy which emerged later in the 19th century, the late 1800s. This postmodernism challenged previously held common philosophical perspectives formulated during previous centuries in the areas of science, identity and culture, linguistics, history, etc. Basically, the Enlightenment ideas of the 17th and 18th centuries. So it challenged these old ideas, right? It was pushed by French cult member intellectuals via academia. People like, you can see the pictures from going clockwise from the top left is Jean-François Lyotard, Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, and Jean-Paul Sartre. These are like some of the main characters involved, but there was loads of them. And these are French academics, and all of them, most of them were engaged in Marxist activism, at least in their youth. They kind of calmed down when they got older. Michel Foucault, that degenerate freak, he was an activist for most of his life. It claims that postmodernism claims that human behavior is programmed primarily through social conditioning as opposed to human nature. For example, gender is a social construct, right? It pushes the idea of subjectivism rather than objectivism. So, for example, my truth, you hear people saying my truth. It's all about what you personally think is real, right? Another example is when people say, I prefer not to see it that way, right? Everyone said that at some stage in their life. That's kind of the postmodern cultural influence. So it basically, postmodernism says there's no such things as universal truth or logic or reason, right? There's no standard that we all have to live up to when it comes to intelligence or logic. Rather, it's all about your own personal interpretations, right? Now, this is very dangerous because it encourages delusion and solidifies indoctrination. So the enemy of indoctrination is rational, logical thinking. So you can see how this is very toxic. It paves the way for people being delusional and detached from reality. So moving on to just some observations about Marxism in general. Is this a cult? Right. So why do I say it's a cult? So the word cult from the Latin cultus, which means worship, and the word colere meaning cultivate. So from dictionary.com, quote, an instance of great veneration of a person, ideal, or thing, especially as manifested by a body of admirers, a group or sect bound together by veneration of the same thing, person, ideal, etc. A group having a sacred ideology and a set of rights. No worries. Thanks, Fanula. Thanks for your help earlier. Appreciate it. A group or sect. So a group having a sacred ideology and a set of rights centering around their sacred symbols. A religion or sect considered to be false, unorthodox, or extremist. Right? So what are the attributes of a cult? So, sorry, the image in the last slide was Vladimir Lenin, Leon Trotsky, Marx, and I forget the last one. I think Stalin. So attributes of a cult, right? So think of the stereotypes of what a cult is. A cult is often a group that has a superiority complex, has a strong sense of fraternity or love amongst its members that does not apply to those outside. So they feel good together. They make each other feel good in their movement. It gives them this weird kind of sense of love when they're together with other Marxist activists. They love each other in a really fucked up way, right? Also, the cult group has delusions of grandeur, which appeals to the delusions of grandeur of the individuals composing it. So they have these ideas, these great ideas that they are great people and they have some sort of amazing purpose. So cults often, they feels it's fighting for some sort of important unresolved issue that the world must be made aware of, or some other lofty purpose, right? So they have this amazing goal. They're going to fix the world like no one has before. They are the special ones who are going to save us all from ourselves, right? That's the part of their thinking. right? A cult is revolutionary in nature. They want to influence or change the world somehow. So they don't just have, ideas that they can change the world. They're willing to actually do something and put it into action. They want revolution. They want change. So this is another reason why it's a cult, right? So Marxist cult members show great veneration for certain historical personalities and hold them aloft as quasi-prophets. So they're almost treated like prophets. So on the left, you've got Karl Marx, who's revered as some sort of a genius, economist, sociologist, and all this bullshit, where he's really a pretty useless man. And he wasn't even good at what he wrote about. He wasn't very as knowledgeable as people think, or as accurate or prophetic or correct. Then you've got Vladimir Lenin, another contender for the worst scumbag of all time. He was arguably worse than Marx because he actually put some of the theories into practice in a way, and physically himself created a situation where a lot of people died and suffered. You've got Leon Trotsky, another scumbag, who's revered as some sort of a god in Trotskyism, who was later assassinated by Stalin in Mexico. You've also got Ernesto Che Guevara, the Argentinian cult member, who is revered as kind of a god and a symbol for revolution. He's another sociopath, rapist and murderer. You've also got Mao Zedong as well, another probably the worst commie scumbag of all time, killed tens of millions of his own people, and he's still regarded as some sort of a prophet or a superhuman man. It's really despicable. yeah, exactly. I don't know if it was a nice pick or a nice axe. I can't remember, but it wasn't nice anyway. But yeah, well spotted. So here's the clenched fist, right? The clenched fist is the symbol. So you see this a lot with Marxists, the old clenched fist, right? And that's where, again, they're actually telling us the way they talk, the way they act, their symbols, the colours, and their gestures tell us that they're Marxists. So in the top left, you can see Free Palestine, got the clenched fist. The next one is labour unions, the workers' general strike. The kind of rose, I think, is the Socialist International or the Progressive International. I can't remember. You can see it's a red rose with a fist in the middle, right? And the one on the right, I just put that in because I thought it was funny. It's the bi fist, so bisexual people, fisting each other. And the bottom right, you've got the another clenched fist movie festival. You've got an eco clenched fist for the climate change movement, Black Lives Matter, of course, and then feminism as well. Of course, same thing, clenched fist. So the top left, you can see Palestinian rights in London march. It's clenched fist again, Free Palestine. Top center is Black Lives Matter. And top right was those American athletes at the Olympics. Can't remember the year, but they're doing the Black Power, like the Black Panthers clenched fist. I realize, I know you can't see me when I do that. I'll put my hand there. So they're clenched fist, okay? The bottom left is, I think there are a bunch of workers striking in Manchester, probably in the 60s or something. Bottom center, likely feminist march. Bottom right, more Black Lives Matter with the sign, I can't breathe. Very funny. So here's more of the symbology and so on. So on the top left, you have the flag of Democratic Kampuchea, which was Cambodia back in the day. I think it was 75 to 79 when Salazar, aka Pol Pot, killed a few million of his own people. One of the worst genocides in the history of communism. You've got the flag of the PRC to the right of that, People's Republic of China. To the right of that is the DPRK flag, which is another red star. The hammer and sickle, the red star, the colour red, you see them being used a lot. So that's North Korea. The one to the right is, I can't remember that, to my shame, which one that is. It's not Soviet, I think it's another country. Bottom right is the hammer and sickle. Socialist Forever, Socialist Party symbol. The one towards the bottom left of the earth is the symbol of the Comintern, established in 1919, and one of the most significant groups in the history of this ideology. They were the groups who established communist parties all across the world. And the bottom left is the Socialist International, I think, the bottom left. But yeah, it's got another rose and the colour red and so on. So you get the idea. They tend to reuse the colours and symbols. if anyone joined late, just letting you know that this is part 2 of my presentation on Marxism. The first part 1 is the pinned tweet on my X profile. It's also in my YouTube video as well. It's the presentation on Marxism at the University of Dallas I did a few weeks ago. So here's Yuri Bezmenov. Not long to go now till I'm finished. Here's Yuri Bezmenov. He was a great man. I have a whole section about him in the book. He's a defector. A Soviet defector. He was stationed in India in the 1960s. He was a press officer with Novosti Press, which is the kind of the KGB, the propaganda arm of the KGB. He said this in an interview with G. Edward Griffin in 1983. He's talking about people being brainwashed with Marxism. He was saying he was talking about in America, what it was like in America at the time. So he said, you are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They're programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind. Even if you expose them to authentic information, you still cannot change the basic perception and logical behavior. Now, that is one of the best sentences I've ever heard anybody say about this issue. They are contaminated. That's perfectly correct. They're programmed to think and react to stimuli in a certain pattern. So if you say you're against mass immigration, you think, we shouldn't help other groups, they'll call you racist. Like I said in the first presentation, if you show certain behaviors, they will attack you. They will call you names. They're programmed to react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. So that is prophetic words from Yuri Bezmenov. Here's another one from the same interview in 1983. He was talking about ideological subversion, which was the Soviet method for infecting countries with Marxism. And I quote, what ideological subversion basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American, or pick your own country, of every Irish person, to such an extent that despite the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. Right? Now that sums up why in Ireland right now people can't get organised and they still don't know what they're dealing with. They're fighting a globalist, communist, New World Order system. But people are confused because they're demoralised and they've got all these silly ideas and they don't know what they're dealing with. They can't get organised. No one can come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending their nation, pretty much. So he said that back in 1983. So it's just over 40 years ago. When it comes to the indoctrination, it's a sliding scale. Right? People can be indoctrinated to different degrees. Someone can be severely indoctrinated or slightly indoctrinated. So you see in the image there, you can see, a little kid being brainwashed with climate change. You could argue is probably only mildly indoctrinated. And you've got a vegan there who's a little bit, you've got a fascist, anti-fascist who are a little bit more extreme. And you've got members of the People's Liberation Army in China, the Chinese army, are probably a little bit more indoctrinated. So it's a sliding scale. People are indoctrinated to different degrees. That's part of the problem we're dealing with, unfortunately. Now, I apologize, some of these slides aren't finished because I kind of put them together in a rush. So you can see, to the left, people casually protesting in a trans rights march probably aren't as bad as a full-on feminist. And then look on the far right, I just put that in for a laugh. That's Fat Boy Kim Jong-un, the commie dictator of North Korea, with these females hanging off him, hysterical, like they're meeting some sort of a god. This is part of the problem we're dealing with. People can be indoctrinated to different levels. Here's another quote from Bezmenov. Understand what's going on around you. You are in a state of war and you have precious little time to save yourself. And he said that in 1983. Because people were saying back then that he was saying people think they're in the peacetime, but they're not. They're actually in a war. We've always been at war with communism for over 100 years. There's never been a peacetime. So here's just add-ons to what I said in the last presentation, that Marxism is AIDS for countries. Marxism destroys countries. Here's a quote from the chess legend and political activist Garry Kasparov. From his book Winter is Coming in 2015. Quote, communism is like an autoimmune disorder. It doesn't do the killing itself, but it weakens the system so much that the victim is left helpless and unable to fight off anything else. It's quite an interesting analogy. We're talking about countries. So the ideology of Marxism does to nations what the HIV virus can do to the human body. Now, not everything to do with Marxism is about class struggle, like we were talking about earlier, oppressor versus oppressed. In my opinion, one of the worst things Marxism does is that it destroys patriotism. It destroys countries. It's anti-patriotism, essentially, right? So it's not the actual virus that kills a person when it comes to HIV. However, it may neutralize the immune system when rendering it ineffective. A HIV plus person may be diagnosed with acquired immunodeficiency syndrome or AIDS. A person can then die of multiple causes that would, under normal circumstances, be dealt with by the immune system. So essentially, an ineffective immune system leads to a weakened, vulnerable organism, right? So imagine countries as being organisms. If a country is an organism, then its immune system is its sense of uniqueness, traditions, patriotism, religiosity, culture, etc. Marxism, the cult ideology, erodes and eventually neutralizes these aspects of a nation. Once this immune system is removed from the equation, the organism or nation is then wide open to attack. Not only does Marxism break down the wall that protects the nation, it invites in dangerous pathogens, the various Marxian sub-agendas, feminism, mass immigration, LGBTQ, economy destroying, climate change, activism, etc., and their effects. So it invites those things in. The Marxism, the cult ideology, is a diseased wrecking ball for a nation's perimeter wall, both symbolically and literally if we include a country's international border. So Marxism makes countries defenseless, essentially. It makes countries defenseless from attack. They lose their integrity, right? Their structural integrity, their perimeter wall. So a sliding scale. A person in today's world, a person either supports internationalism or globalism or opposes it to one degree or another. At this time, this is all that matters when we are judging people on political, geopolitical, sociological, or bigger picture issues, right? Since there are many combinations of personality, it's a sliding scale. So you can see this is nothing to do with the political, Overton window or the political dichotomy left or right. It's not necessarily to do with that. I'm just talking about globalism. But you can see in the scale on the left, those supporting internationalist globalism, and those on the right, those opposing internationalist globalism, and all the variations in between. So everyone you know, including yourself, is somewhere on that scale. I am extremely on the far right in this scale. This is my only purpose, is to oppose this globalist system. There's all these different everybody in society fits somewhere on this. You're either against this or you're for it to one degree or another. And at the bottom, of course, globalism is internationalist, totalitarian, revolutionary Marxism. It's all the same thing. It's all about world domination, right? So using that same scale, you can see on the left, sorry, I made a mistake here. I should be the other way around. It doesn't match the last graph, but I'll explain this one anyway. So on the left in this one, you can see, I'll start on the right. So on the right, you've got all the Marxists, the cult members. They're trying to drag us towards, in the top right, they're trying to drag us towards world government, economic collapse, social division and conflict, and universal uniformity. They're dragging us stubbornly, psychotically dragging us towards all that crap. And on the left, everybody else, more or less, is trying to drag us, our countries, towards national sovereignty, economic prosperity, social cohesion, and genuine diversity. One of the effects of Marxism is that it destroys the naturally occurring diversity in society. It drags us, it ruins those things, and those of us who are fighting Marxism, fighting globalism, are actually protecting whatever genuine diversity we have left. So just to finish up, I've got a few slides here on solutions. So this is about suppressing the ideology. So what can we do to fix this problem, right? So just to put it straight, I'll go for the jugular here right at the beginning. At the top of the slide, I say the goal. So goal, incrementally reducing the ratio of cult members. So we have to keep this in mind. The best way to save our countries from globalism is to incrementally reduce the amount of people in our society who are brainwashed with Marxism, who are on that scale I talked about. Where are they? Are they fighting globalism? Are they helping? We have to gradually move everyone over to the fighting globalism side, and obviously Marxists are on the opposite side. So we need to incrementally reduce the amount of these people in society through changing the culture, stop new people getting brainwashed, and also suppress and marginalize people who are already brainwashed, to take them away from power and influence. So of course we have to replace the degeneracy in education and culture, in our culture, with patriotic traditional values, right? So everyone's been talking about that for years. And these are just some of the solutions. We need to ban the NGOs and the non-profits, anyone pushing Marxism. We need to close those down. We need to stop all that because they drain money from the economy and they create more activists. And it's also they promote Marxism, which brings in more cult members. So we can't have that in the future. We need to, when it comes to education, we could ban Marxism being taught in the universities. It cannot be allowed to continue where young impressionable minds are being brainwashed in schools. It might be primary school, secondary school, or high school, or university. At any level, we need to make sure that this stops. Or another option is that we could still teach Marxism, but teach it in a critical way and expose it for what it is, so people have the knowledge go out. So I would love to be part of an initiative like that in Ireland or in any other Western country, to actually to educate people on and keep them immune from this ideology and raise awareness about it, which is the opposite to what's been done to now, where it's been taught in a positive light. So it's like preventing people from being brainwashed, essentially. That you would need, society would need people like myself to do this job, or to train people to teach this, to do this job. Obviously, the idea of only teaching to criticize it might popularize it and make it attractive. So we have to work it out. And I pose the question, will this work when we still have so many brainwashed people around who will glorify it? So, it's very, very difficult to try and fix this, but we need everybody on board with the idea that Marxism is negative first before we get there. And people can't get to that point unless they have the knowledge, which is where the book and the presentations come in. And I'm not the only one doing this job, but people need to learn it before they can start opposing it, and before we can start detoxifying of it. I would recommend banning marches, public displays. That includes the Pride March, Drag Queen Story Time. All that stuff needs to be banned. If enough people hate this and don't want it to happen anymore, it will ban. There is such a thing as people power, but enough people need to have the intelligence to realize these things are toxic, and then we can use social pressure to ban all these things, to stop them across society. These things only exist because they're being supported by a certain population, of a portion of the population. It's not just the government doing this, it's the general public or think these things are benevolent, and that's the problem. We also need to ban abortion services, which originates from feminism. There's loads of things we need to do. There's just some off the top of my head. We've also got the free speech problem as well, and we're going to have to deal with that in the future, where when we start suppressing Marxism, people are going to say, what about my free speech? Well, fuck your free speech. People shouldn't have free speech if they're going to be Marxist. This is where people often repeat the concept of free speech like parrots, without engaging their intelligence. Yeah, it is a good thing, and we've been talking about it a lot, because the globalist system will suppress your speech if you're going against globalism. Where I'm talking about suppressing globalist speech, I'm talking about suppressing Marxist speech. That is ethical and benevolent, and it is something we need to push for, because, as I argue in the book, Marxism is extremely toxic, and it goes from person to person through speech. And so there's a problem here, and I'm predicting a lot of people are going to struggle with what I'm saying, because they've got a distorted perception of what's right and wrong. Nobody has the right to spread Marxism in society. This thing is from the pit of hell. We've never seen anything like this, and it's bringing us towards World War III, and people can't even see it. And then someone's going to try to argue with me that it's okay for people to talk about this openly and brainwash people around them. No, it isn't. No. This is above ideas like free speech. This is above all that, and we shouldn't tolerate any of this at all in society. Nobody has the right to peddle an anti-humanity ideology from the pit of hell. Nobody has that right. Okay, this has got, in my opinion, this is going to really test people's concept of ethics, intelligence, and their understanding of the bigger picture and what the purpose of all this is, really. There's also the human rights problem. So this is another thing that Marxists are going to do. People are brainwashed. They're going to start crying about their human rights when they start taking their rights away because they're causing trouble. So, for example, the trans activists might say their human rights are being infringed upon because they're not allowed to teach in schools or not allowed to march in the street and so on. But if we let them do it, they're bringing more people into the movement and normalizing it, which can't be. We can't accept that. Not at this stage of the game. And actually, Yuri Bezmenov, who I mentioned earlier, he advocated us having taking away people's rights who are being Marxists. He said the alternative to that is that you're going to end up with civil war or societal breakdown. So you can either do it the nice way and be a little bit firm on these people and take away their rights and follow some of the recommendations I've made, or you can give them their freedom to be psychotic and to ruin society, and then you end up back in this situation we're in now, which isn't intelligent or noble. And I think I'm going to really struggle getting this point across to people that one of the best ways to do it in the future is to suppress people's rights if they're going to be psychotic Marxist activists. I think some people are going to struggle with that, to be honest. So the role of parents is really important. So parents need to beware of anyone working with or on behalf of the state. So those in educational or influential capacity, the odds are high that they've received a contaminated Marxist education, which they will then pass on to your children. So we need to keep an eye on anyone else our parents need to keep an eye on anyone else who could influence their child. This can come from friends, relations, co-workers, teammates at sports, and let's not forget the media, entertainment, social media influences. So society is full of people who can contaminate your kids with Marxism, and we need to stop. We need to somehow fix that, right? So there's a parent there reading his kid the Communist Manifesto, but this is a really difficult situation that unfortunately we need to find a way of keeping our kids separate from this indoctrination, or we can just forget about the whole thing. That the world is going to just go down to the toilet, and there's nothing we can do to stop it if we keep allowing Marxists to brainwash kids. Right now, how do we fix this? Parents need to be educated about Marxism. If they're not educated about Marxism, they're not going to be able to keep their kids insulated from Marxism. It's just basic logic. That's why one of the target groups of the book was parents. The targets of my work with the presentations of, I'm shooting that at everybody, but particularly parents, because kids are the future, and this needs to take a top priority. Talking about politics and elections and all that stuff isn't going to matter at all if every day like that new people are being brainwashed into joining the Marxist cult through schools and so on. So you can forget about everything else. If we don't fight the battle for the control of the minds of kids, we're going to lose the whole war. Forget about the rest. You're wasting your time, because people like us are going to be the minority, and even smaller and smaller as time goes by, and the cult membership is going to continue to swell constantly. If people think it's bad now, wait till a few years down the line when all these kids start coming out of school, and they will look at someone like me as being crazy because I say that climate change is a scam, you can't change your gender, and so on and so forth. Or I don't agree with feminism. They will look at me like I'm psychotic. But they're the ones who are fucked up in the head, So people think it's bad now. You think it's dystopia now. Wait till a few years down the line when all these kids start coming out of school and graduating from college with their spaghetti logic brains, with no conscience. One of the things that Marxism does is it amputates people's conscience. if they had one in the first place. It takes away their sense of right and wrong. So for parents, suspicion is required. Everyone must be vetted. So parents need to vet everyone around their kids. They need to vet everyone for Marxist indoctrination before they are allowed contact with the young. This is a really difficult task. A person, parent or not, needs to understand the ideology cult, Marxism, sufficiently in order to identify who's a cult member and who isn't. So people need to get good at figuring out who's brainwashed and who isn't, right? Everyone needs this. This is a new life skill now we all need. Parents must devote some time to studying and understanding this subject. So that's a give. It's a mandatory now. Every parent needs to study this subject. And I know it's difficult because when you're a parent, you gotta work, you gotta look after the kids, you gotta make sure they're fed, clothed, watered, they've got a social life. You give them emotional support, financially support them, feed them and look after them for years. Depending on the kid, it could be almost the first 20 years of their life. In addition to all of that, you need to keep them safe from Marxism. It's a really difficult time for people to have kids. So here's some of the problems. I'm almost finished. So here's some of the problems I run into when I'm teaching this subject, right? No worries, Philip. Appreciate it. Thank you. And make sure you check out the first part if you haven't seen it. It's my pinned tweet on X, and it's also another, it's on my YouTube page here. Part 1 of the presentation is the live one at the University of Dallas. So here's some of the problems I deal with when I'm teaching this or when I'm talking about this issue, right? It's very, very frustrating, right? Because this is why this is the biggest problem in the world, and it's very old. It's not new, but yet we still haven't fixed it because people's approaches have been wrong. So I've got a new approach to an old problem, right? And these are some of the challenges I have to deal with, right? So the top one there, some people focus on the totalitarian communist regimes of the past, or the Marxist-Lenin regimes of the past, like, the Soviet Union, Red China, Pol Pot. When I say Marxism, they want to talk about all that stuff. Now, those things aren't bad. Or they want to talk about Mao and Mao Zedong in China, the Cultural Revolution and so on, right? Or what happened in Cuba, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, talking about those things isn't bad, but it's not the main issue. Remember, you could talk about the history of this subject all day long, right? But if you don't talk about the brainwashing in the present and stop it in the present, you're wasting your time, right? So it's not bad to talk about those things because it shows the evil of what the ideology can bring or create in our world, absolutely, but it's not the priority. And sometimes when I deal with people talking about that, that's all they know is the historical stuff, but they're rubbish at analysing the economic side of it, or the psychological side of it, or the cultural side of it, or the political side of it, so I always recommend a panoramic view with this stuff. Don't just learn about one bit because you end up very one-dimensional. Be a bit more panoramic, be a bit more multi-skilled and multifaceted. That's the best way to deal with this complex subject. So another problem I deal with is some people focus on Marxism from only a materialistic or economic point of view, aka socialism, the idea of a centralized government, appropriation of private property, equity, suppression of rights, etc. Again, talking about those things isn't bad, but it's not only about that. Marxism is yes, it's physical, but it's also metaphysical, psychological, etc. Right? So let's not get dragged into just one area of it. And I'm not minimizing those things. It is a pretty serious, horrible thing when you have a powerful state who's taking away people's rights and starts enforcing Marxist ideas, taking away their private property, trying to enforce equity, suppressing their free speech. Yeah, those things are horrible and they do ruin their lives and it leads to death and destruction. But I would always recommend, don't just look at it just in terms of material things or rights and so on. Look at the bigger picture, look at the psychological, the brainwashing, all that, to give yourself a nice panoramic view and not just bang the same drum all the time. The ideology itself is multifaceted, so we should be the same in our analysis, I believe. Here's another one, Zionism and the Jews. Right? This is a big problem. I deal with this all the time. There's an erroneous the myth that the Jews created communism, and whenever I bring up this subject, people want to start talking about the Jews. This is a really bad habit, because if you look at a country like Ireland, it's Irish people brainwashed with this ideology who've been mostly responsible for destroying Ireland, and continue to do so. And, it must be less than 1% of them are Jewish, probably, maybe even less than that. So this idea of blaming Zionism, the Jews, they create communism, is a distortion of the facts. Communism doesn't come from the Jews. The vast majority of people pushing this ideology at all levels are not Jewish. And people bring up examples like the Bolsheviks. They're mostly Jewish. Wasn't as many Jews in the Bolshevik regime as people think. They'll always bring up the Frankfurt School. Yes, they were all Jewish, but they were Marxist Jews. Not all Jews are the same, you see. It's a big complex subject, but as you can see here what I wrote, what it results in, the Fabian Society are one of the more powerful Fabian groups. They weren't Jewish at all. Karl Marx was Jewish. Engels, the co-author of the Communist Manifesto, wasn't Jewish, and a lot of the people who influenced Marx, like Hegel, Babeuf, and so on, Rousseau, the majority of these characters were not Jewish. So the idea that communism comes from the Jews is a distortion of the facts. But also it leads to the point as well, who do you blame more? People who embody the ideology today in your country, or somebody who died 200 years ago? It's a distorted way of trying to fix problems, and it doesn't produce results, right? So I mentioned here, blaming the Jews and Zionism allows people to blame a separate group, not their own people, right? It's a really bad habit, because what you're doing is you're saying that you're being oppressed by someone else, ironically. Someone else is to blame for the mess you're in. It never produces results. It's a really bad habit. In fact, it's a form of brainwashing. So in addition, as I said, it does nothing to solve the indoctrination problem. So there are hundreds of thousands of people in Ireland brainwashed with Marxism. A friend of mine put the estimate at 500,000. It could be higher than that, of people brainwashed with this. I don't really know. I'd have to look. You'd have to interview everyone to see where they are. But Ireland is a highly brainwashed place, like a lot of Western countries, and trying to blame some other group doesn't fix the issue at all. Another problem I deal with is people going too deep, or intellectualizing, or stuck in theory, or they start talking about the opinions of what Marx said, or Lenin, and all these dead people, and they over-intellectualize the debate. And sometimes people get confused about my role. They think my role is to debate Marxism with them, because that's what they're used to in colleges and so on. And I often get irritated when that happens. It might be an X space or something else. They think that our opinions are equal. I'm trying to fix the problem, and they're trying to intellectually debate with me. But they don't understand that they're getting in the way. And this is why Marxism is destroying the world, because we have all these people with big egos who want to just talk all day, and they're not actually interested in solving problems. It drives me mental. And you're going to notice that yourself if you want to get into this. People get stuck in the theory and in the past, or in opinions. They put their egos above what's right, which is a real shame and a real problem. Another problem group is Christians as well, surprisingly. And I deal with this sometimes because as I talk about in the book, there's a whole section in my book where I talk about the importance of Christianity. It's one of the pillars of the West, like capitalism, Christianity, culture are the pillars of the West, and Marxism destroys them. Christianity is an important part of the West. I'm not a Christian myself, but I would defend Christianity myself. And I often say that Marxism is Satanism repackaged, right? It's an anti-humanity ideology, as I mentioned. But the problem with Christians, I notice, is that some Christians feel that all they have to do is have faith and pray, and that's going to fix everything, or to be Christian. I disagree with that, right? It's a common mistake. And so sometimes some people can insinuate that having faith is more important than understanding Marxism. That's not true, because again, that does nothing to fix the problem of indoctrination in society, right? And that's like with any belief system, people tend to gravitate towards their own beliefs. And I noticed this with American spaces in particular, when there'll be like hundreds of people listening. It's not like the Irish spaces, there'll be like a few hundred people listening, or 1,000 people listening, or whatever, and there'll be a big emphasis on Christianity. And I hear them talking, it tends to become an echo chamber where they just start talking about their faith and being Christian. But it's just an echo chamber, not actually learning anything, and they switch off, and they don't think they have to listen to me or analysts like me about Marxism. That's a mistake. As I often point out, God never stepped in to stop communism killing all those people, and it included Christians, you know. This is not an insult to Christianity or to God, but the idea that God is going to step in and fix this problem for us is not true, right? So we have to do this ourselves, and logically speaking, having faith and praying, being Christian, is not going to stop Marxism, and never will. And this other idea as well of people saying that we need to go back to Christianity, this idea that we have to go back to Christianity, that's not going to work either, because not everybody's going to be Christian. So, I'm just talking about, these are the all these lists, these are some of the things that get in the way of us talking about this issue, and is actually can be counterproductive. So here's a little just thing, a thought that came into my head about the reason why Ireland is collapsing and it's struggling is because there's people that have these like as a nation we have these chameleon eyes. People are trying to project blame towards these different groups, right? These habits. So these are just some of the ones I could think of. So the Jews and Zionism, like I mentioned, people blaming the Jews and Zionism for what's happened to their country's capitalism, which comes from Marxist brainwashing. Freemasons, which is a conspiratorial worldview, and they are a real group, but they're not to blame for what's happened to Ireland, I can tell you that much. The elites, right, is another one. Now, by the way, a lot of the internationalist bankers, globalist types, ideologically speaking, they're Marxist. People can be rich billionaires and still be Marxist, like a George Soros type, right? Now, a Marxist would come along and say, yeah, George Soros, and they might say he's evil. Some of them might, right? Because he's rich and he's a billionaire, but ideologically speaking, he's Marxist. He's a graduate of the London School of Economics, which I mentioned earlier, created by the Fabian Society, So when people say the elites, the New World Order, these people are ideologically internationalists. Marxism is internationalism, right? So the elites are Marxist oftentimes. A lot of people seem to miss that point. Here's another one, politicians and government. Yes, the Irish government, like a lot of Western governments, is full of degenerates and traitors who deserve life in prison, right? But again, constantly blaming the government for what's happened to the country doesn't really produce results, because remember, the government's a reflection of the people. People in Ireland have sleepwalked into this nightmare because we are all distracted, and we let all these crazy fanatics get into power and start directing the country's affairs, and now we don't like the results. So again, it's back to the victimhood thing. Someone else is to blame for our situation. So everyone in Ireland, like all the other Western countries, all that drinking, partying, doing drugs, getting wrapped up in watching the sports, the reality TV programs, having your head up your ass in general, being wrapped up in your own emotional problems, being absorbed with making money or other stuff that's distracted you. Remember, while you've been alive all of your life, this ideology, this agenda, this world control agenda is older than you, whoever you are watching. Even if you're 110 years old, it's still older than you. So what were you doing your whole life? Where have you been? The same thing applies to me. Where have we all been when this thing has been built around us? Everyone's been distracted and caught up in their own bullshit. Now, the very young have an excuse because, when you're young and you're just kind of figuring things out. But what about all the people who are a bit older? What have they been doing? What have they learned? How come they have not seen this earlier? Another one, the bottom right there, is the international bankers. Now, there's not just only one group or a certain type of individual to blame, but I'm just saying that people constantly apportion the blame to things outside themselves that they can't control. But what we can control is who around us in our society is brainwashed to go along with internationalism. That's actually something that can produce results. That's why I advocate us looking at that rather than putting the blame everywhere else. So here's from Karl Marx's tombstone from his where he's buried in Highgate Cemetery in London. This is one of his quotes. So I think it's one of his quotes. The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it, right? So that's like a wow, wonderful, wise statement from Marx. Yeah, that's a very interesting idea, but you should know what the fuck you're doing. So this is a major problem with us dealing with kids brainwashed with Marxism. The young should just live their lives a bit first before they think about trying to change the world. Young people in particular are in no position to change society. They can barely even control themselves. They're not mature enough to. But this kind of message here on this tombstone is what's being pushed through the universities and through the culture. They're trying to get little kids with single digit ages, 8 and 9 years old, to be revolutionaries and take over the world. So it's a major problem. But this notion is, to add on to this, if you're going to try and impact on the world, you better know what you're doing, otherwise you're going to make a mess. And Marxism, from this point of view, is a prolifically failing ideology. And the kind of people brainwashed with Marxism are in no position to try to dictate the world's affairs. I think I'm pretty much at the end here, folks. So the ego, workers of all lands unite. So the ego is a big problem, that's what drives a lot of this, is people thinking they know what's best, but they don't. But there's so much more we can say about that. I think I'm at the end. Yeah, that's the last slide. So anyway, folks, I think I'm going to leave it there because it's getting quite late. I want to grab a late supper. But thanks for watching. If anyone is still listening, I'd highly recommend you check out the first video, which is the pinned tweet on my X profile. It's about 56 minutes long for the presentation only, and about 1 hour and 40 minutes for the whole thing if you want to watch the Q&A. There's also you can find the YouTube version here on YouTube as well. And what else? My website is resolvingor.com. And so resolving R for Romeo, just the letter R, so R for Romeo, resolvingor.com. And there's a page there about the book Red Pandemic, The Global Marxist Cult. I would urge you to grab a copy. You can grab a copy on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, depending on where you are in the world. If you're in Ireland, the UK, or Western Europe or whatever, you could just order straight from the publisher, Omnia Veritas. But all the links are on my website, resolvingor.com. So anyone listening back, watching this back, do us a favor and share these around, just to kind of reach as many people as possible. I know everyone's a lot of people are too busy to read the book or lazy or whatever, but the presentations do a lot to at least give some more knowledge and get the message out there. Because remember that the more we understand Marxism, the more we can suppress it, the more we can oppose globalism, the more we can allow patriotism to rise and stop all this degeneracy and save our countries. So I consider this stuff as being like a training course for patriots or anti-globalists or nationalists, whatever you want, or libertarians, whatever you want to call yourself. This is a training course to bring people up to speed on this ideology, because whoever you are, whatever you believe in, if you have a conscience, opposing Marxism should be on your to-do list, shall we say. But thank you very much, folks, and thanks for your support, Lamb Chop, as well. Just losing my voice. Shit, perfect timing. But thanks very much for watching, folks, and thanks for the sound checks and so on earlier. So I'm going to end the stream here, but I'll probably do another one soon. But thanks very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Thank you very much. Thank you.